Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast. It's episode 14, and as usual, I'm joined by Barry.
Hello, hello. Excited to be here as always.
Yep, you can tell Barry's excited to be here because he's got that board game energy.
Yeah, big board game energy. That's what they call it.
That's what they call it. I'm pleased to be back from Essen. I've got a ton of new Essen games that I've not yet had a chance to look at because I've been too busy working since I came back. But we're going to talk through some of the stuff that I played at Essen. We're going to start off, though, with the news. And we're also going to cover the stuff that Barry played while I was at Essen.
Since you didn't take me with you, Mike, very disappointed. Maybe next year.
Maybe next year, Barry. Well, someone has to play games because we certainly don't get to play many games at Essen. Although, actually, this year was quite a good year. Normally, it's quite tough to play games at Essen, just because we're so busy all the time. So at best, we get demos at the convention. Mm-hmm. But this year was better. We got to play some more stuff for whatever reason. We managed to sequester some people who knew how to play, so we didn't have to read any rule books. Things like that. So we've got some stuff to talk about there. I'll also mention before we get into the news, I've got 2 videos coming out on the channel this week. The week that this episode comes out, unless it's been delayed because I've been working on those videos. But there's 2 brand new videos out on the channel. One is a playthrough of Elder Scrolls with Mark. So you should go and check out our first session. We're going to play all 3 sessions, so there's going to be 3 videos in total. But this first video, we play through the whole first session of Elder Scrolls, Betrayal of the Second Era, and we take you through the rules as well. So it's sort of a learn-as-you-go type thing, and hopefully it'll help you to see the flow of the game and how it works in practice. And hopefully you'll enjoy coming along on Mark and I's adventure as well, because it's pretty funny stuff. And then we've got Grineville, which is coming to crowdfunding in the end of the month. Well, this week, actually. The campaign will be live right now, and you can go and check it out. This is a city building game where you are moving around an action rondel. And what's sort of unique about this system is that the spaces you land on compel you forward. It's all about making the most money while you develop the town of Grineville by building buildings, moving in residents, and planting trees. But ultimately, the points are the money is points at the end. And as you take actions on this rondel, it propels you around the rondel based on the action you've taken, and you can pay to slow your advance. So it's sort of like this system where you can literally pay action points to like take more actions before you complete a circuit. But which you might want to do, but also you don't want to spend that money because you need it to build the buildings and win the game. But then you have to pay wages and taxes when you get all the way around the rondel. So there's that to contend with as well. So that was a 3-player game that I did with Mark and with Michael. So you can check that out on the channel this week as well. And both of those are sponsored videos by the former by Chip Theory Games, who published Elder Scrolls, and the latter by Rudy3, who's crowdfunding Grineville. So some content for you there.
Nice. So how was Essen?
Essen was big. I believe this is the busiest Essen ever. And
bank holiday and just every year bigger, better, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. So it is. I mean, I think they're taking up more. Well, I think they're taking up the same amount of space, but it felt like they had a bit more space than they normally do. And they're certainly moving the press stuff around. So we were there with press passes again. So we're very grateful to the convention for giving us those press passes so we can get in and do some coverage. And I posted a lot of stuff up on the socials as well. So if you don't follow us on the socials, you can go and find us on, I was using Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube Shorts and TikTok. So if you prefer any of those platforms, you can go and find some 60-second clips of us talking to people about their games and also the games we were playing and talking a bit about those as well. So that was all good stuff. Really fun to be doing that. And we got to see a bunch of new games as well and demo some stuff that's sort of forthcoming. And it's just manic, Barry. It's like we get there on the Tuesday. We start bright and early on Wednesday because we've got the press passes. There's sort of stuff for us to do on Wednesday and meet up with the publishers as well and things like that. So we're really getting started on Wednesday. and everything wraps up Sunday night. So it is like the best part of a week, and it just flies by. You know, while you're in it, it's just manic, and you're constantly sort of checking things and doing things and all that. And then suddenly it's all over, you know, and you're in the car on the way back to where you're going.
Shell shocked.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah, like what happened? What did I miss? Like this year, I just completely forgot about the Nucleum expansion. I always forget about something, right? And so that was Nucleum Court of Progress, and I was quite excited about that. You know, I've been really enjoying Nucleum. It's sort of like Nucleum's like a sort of under the radar slow burner, and I think it's because it's such a sort of like hard to sell Euro. But we talked about it on the previous episode, number 12, and we both enjoyed it. And I'm always happy to play more Nucleum because it's sort of got that Euro levers to pull and buttons to push kind of vibes, but with tight timing and spatial considerations where you're sort of jostling for certain positions, which makes it a bit more interactive and a bit more satisfying, I think, than Euros that are more solitary. So, you know, I was very keen to look at Court of Progress and see what that added, but I just completely forgot. Like, I was just so busy running around, sorting everything out and doing everything. So hopefully I'll get a chance to look at that at some stage in the near future.
Yeah, you definitely get it soon. But obviously a lot of the big board game news was around things coming out at Essen.
Yep.
Do you have anything live from the floor? Or is there anything else you've spotted that's new and exciting?
So I think the thing about Essen is it's a lot of the big releases. So it tends not to be massive announcements there. It's more like you can demo or play things that are brand new or even oftentimes airshipped in ahead of their general release. There was tantalizingly, actually I'll share this tidbit with you because it really amused me, but I left, at some stage I left Michael at the Arcane Wonders booth to go off and do something else. And we're quite friendly with their media representative. And when I came back, they were having a nice discussion. And then Michael and I went off to do something else. And Michael was like, oh, they were telling me, Arcane Wonders were telling me about their next big announcement. And I was like, oh, yeah, they haven't mentioned it to me. What is it? And he's like, I forgot. I was like, so we don't know. He's like,
and that's the kind of hard-hitting journalism you can expect here on the channel.
Exactly. This is the standard you should acclimatize to. And don't expect anything more. So I still don't know because Michael still hasn't remembered what he was told about.
Fair enough.
Maybe it's possible they told him some really super secret confidential information knowing this would happen. But your secret's safe with Michael if you all want to give him some scoops. But, you know, we did get to demo Aeturna over at Ares Games, which is coming out in a couple months, I think, at retail. And this is a new Martin Wallace game. And you know what it actually really gave me vibes of was the game we played, the Fall of Empires?
Empire's Fall, I think.
Yeah.
So is it like a reverse civilization builder where you're struggling to keep things?
Yeah, so we played this game together, Barry and I, and it's basically like you start off with a civilization tableau and then you're playing rounds of no thanks as your buildings collapse. And it was an interesting it's the designer of the card crafting games, isn't it?
John DeClaire.
It's John DeClaire, right? That's right. So yeah, John DeClaire designed this one, and so I was given vibes because that's all about the sort of collapse of the empires. And in Aeternum, you start off with Rome, and there's all these action spaces, and you're building a tableau, but it's only 3 rounds long, the whole game. So it feels a bit like post-production editor Mike jumping in here because the game I'm trying to remember the name of is Evenfall. A game that came out at Essen last year, and it's similar to Aeturna in the sense that both games are 3 rounds long. They involve some worker placement, but the main thing is the tableau building because you are sort of playing cards and profiting from them sort of in the same rounds and then building up over the course of the 3, but because you're playing the cards and getting rewards from them, there's this real sort of manic tableau building energy to both games. And then after 3 rounds, suddenly it's over. Okay, so it's a tableau building game, but it's 3 rounds. And you are doing a lot of tableau building round to round because it's only 3 of them. And you're going to be getting resources from the cards you play. You're also going to be building out asymmetrical abilities. So the cards come in different flavors. One is just like, get a bunch of resources. The other is, get this asymmetrical power. And some of them are like, passive effects, and some of them are tap to use this ability at a specific timing window. And there is also this concept of heat, which is, I guess it's the ire of the people. Thematically, I'm not entirely sure what it's representing, but it's general bad will against you, presumably because the empire is falling and you're seen as a figurehead. And you have to manage your heat, because at the end of each round, you'll pay a payout based on how much heat you've taken. And you will stay there on this heat track. So you'll accrue outgoings based on how high you are up on the track. And if you end the game at the very top, you will be disqualified from winning. If you are near the top at the end, you will lose points. And additionally, there's also certain cards that have heavy costs will give you these sort of tiers, which move you up that track at the end. So managing your position on the heat track, absolutely vital. And then round to round, there are these worker placement spaces, and you're sort of getting people from these cards that you're playing into your tableau, and then you can use them to place out onto the board. But at the end of each round, there's going to be a governor elected for each worker placement space, and that governor is going to get a ton of bonuses. But then if that worker placement space collapses, that governor is going to take penalties, and specifically heat. So you're going to move up that heat track again. So and so as these spaces collapse, they've got less resources available on them. They've got less positions for people to take up. You can go some way to building buildings on those spaces. That's a separate action to improve them. So there's an element of some of the spaces getting better, but then they get worse because they collapse again. And you can't stop the collapse. It just happens automatically every round. Some stuff collapses, and then maybe some people and then definitely some people take heat, and we move on. It was a really sort of tight system, and you begin every round with a draft as well. So these cards you're playing to your tableau come from a closed draft, where you're passing hands around. But you can sort of see what other people have got and try to discern what their strategy might have been as well. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting, really good. I really, really enjoyed it. So that was one I was quite keen to check out in more detail, because we got a 4-player game in actually, and I liked the player interaction. I liked how you cared about the worker placement spots, and I liked the sort of sense of the board closing off even as you build up your tableau. Really neat.
Fun.
That was probably the one that we played that's not available yet to demo. That was most sort of interesting. On the topic of Martin Wallace, I didn't get a chance to look at Steam Powered, so that was a shame. But maybe I'll have a chance to play it at some stage.
Too many games these days. Not enough time.
Well, precisely. And I don't know, Steam Powered, after we talked about it on the Hype episode, it was sort of one that kind of fell down in my sort of interest. I thought it looked like a sort of faster but less interesting version of Railways of the World. Now, I could definitely be wrong, but I just don't know if I need that.
Railways of the World isn't too... I wouldn't say it's too much, right? I think it's pretty base.
I mean, there are definitely different variants of it, right? There's an enormous number of expansions and, variant maps that add more mechanisms and things like that. Core Railways of the World or the lighter Railways of Nippon are both, Core Railways is probably a 2-hour game. Really depends on player count. If you're under 4 players, you can probably do it in 90-2. If you're 4 or 5 players, and again, it might actually not go up to 5. I might be thinking of an expansion. I can't remember. But then you're probably looking at 2 to 3 hours. But yeah, I think steam powered is intended to be faster than that. But
claims 45 to 90 minutes on Board Game Geek. So
for railways or for steam powered?
For steam powered.
For steam powered, yeah. I can see that, I guess. I mean, I didn't get a chance to check that one out, so that one sort of slipped through the radar as well. But we did get a chance to play some more stuff in full back at the Airbnb where we were staying, and I'll talk about that when we get to the played section. But for now, why don't we move on into the news and find out what's been going on while I've been at Essen?
Sure. All of my news stories this week are role-playing games, and they're all crowdfunded on various different platforms as well. So it seems like whilst the board game world was over in Germany, the RPG world has been launching various new properties or revising new properties. One of which is one near and dear to my heart, having growing up with the game books throughout the years, and that is the Lone Wolf Adventures in Magnamund RPG. So this is currently live on Kickstarter, and you should still have some time to back it by the time you see this podcast or listen to this podcast. And it's not the first Lone Wolf RPG. Lone Wolf was a series of game books by Joe Deaver throughout the 80s and 90s. Sadly, when he passed a few years back, his son took over the republishing effectively of the game books, and they've been really expanding the IP. But similarly, there was an old RPG system through Cubicle 7, and this was killed off a few years ago now. Maybe not necessarily in favour of this new one. This is published by, I forget the name, it's a Swedish company, Ask or Ask. I'm not sure how you say it with the circles above the A. Not umlauts, like a circle. Unsure. But it's based upon Free League's Dragonbane system. But this has been published in Swedish for some years now. But unfortunately, the main sort of contributor to that passed a couple of years ago, and since then there's not been a lot. So this is a sort of campaign to bring everything, or not necessarily everything, but quite a lot of it into English, and onto the Dragonbane system used here, and various extras that come with it in terms of the adventures and the maps and all these other parts. Now I will say, as a caveat, because of the passing of Tove Gilbring a couple of years ago, her husband is behind on a number of other Kickstarters at the moment, so take this at your own risk. But since she was quite a strong driving force behind some of these sort of projects, it makes sense that he's fallen behind, and I think we're caught up now to some degree, with updates coming on everything that hasn't been delivered. But this is very much a at your own risk one.
I see.
Not that you're a big RPG player.
I would love to be, but I don't have time to make a YouTube channel and play RPGs. It's sad. I barely have enough time to play board games.
Yeah.
Too busy making videos about them. Well, this looks great. I love the sort of the classic art, that classic sort of ridiculous fantasy look, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because the IP goes back to the 80s, and the world of Magnamund was based on the author's D&D campaign, and the worlds that they were creating before there was really solidified worlds that D&D and Wizards kind of managed. There's a lot more freedom and a lot more homebrews. I'm not saying there's not any now, but everybody had to make up their own stories and their own lore back in the day.
Oh, good stuff. Well, I'm familiar with Free League. I've seen them around a lot, and I've seen some of their sci-fi stuff that they were doing and things like that. So at least you're sort of in good hands with that system. All right. Well, why don't we crack on with more RPG stuff, because you've got all the RPG news, and then I'll wrap up with the board game news.
I'll run through them all, and people can skip it. You can put a timestamp for everybody that's not got any interest.
If you're not interested in RPG books, skip to this next section.
So another one on backer kit. This time it is The Between. So The Between is one about monster hunters in Victorian England, and I've not played it, so I can't really say much to the system, and I'm not super au fait with the mythos stuff behind it. But there was a video I seen a couple of months ago from the Bad Spot on 7 reasons why The Between was his favourite tabletop RPG. And it was just really interesting that the player characters come together to solve this mystery, except it seems like you don't know the answer when you start. And what you're doing is having the players come up with connections, which then effectively mold themselves into the reality of the story. There's a mastermind that sits behind the whole system, or behind the whole scenario that they're playing, and the one pulling the strings. However, if the players are able to make a connection between a couple of the clues, in whatever form, you can kind of roll with that to make that the actual case. So you're dropping in these clues, and then it's up to the players to figure out how those fit. And so I guess you could go a little bit rogue with what clues you're dropping, but you'll be surprised at how the imagination of a group of individuals playing role-playing games can draw these connections and come up with the most outlandish ideas. And then I imagine it's quite satisfying, because then your players are like, oh, I knew it. Oh, wow, I made that great leap of logic. When really, behind the curtain, it was quite open as to how they got there. And so seemed quite an interesting one to at least play a couple of games off to see how it goes.
Yeah, that certainly sounds really interesting. I mean, I think that so I have played Fiasco, and that's sort of like an iterative sort of case that you're unfolding that's sort of created by the players as you go, and that's a lot of fun. I mean, there's no dungeon master in that, so maybe with a dungeon master or a mastermind, as it's called in this, I guess, and a little bit more guidance, that might be even more rewarding and fulfilling.
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, the mastermind is an in-game character.
Oh, okay.
Rather than the dungeon master.
But it does have a game master.
It does have a game master, yeah. And then an IP that perhaps we weren't necessarily expecting, but Terry Pratchett's Discworld has an RPG coming out now. So this is through Modifius, who make a number of licensed RPGs, and set in the world of the Terry Pratchett novels, the Discworld novels, the 41 Discworld novels as it happens. Looking it up earlier. I don't know if you've read them all, but it's a super, it's just such a fun world to immerse yourself in. And the system, again, I've not played it because it's not out, but the system seems very rules light. You've only got a few stats, and you're rolling. I'm trying to remember what this one was. I think you're rolling a different dice based on your ability. So from the polyhedral dice. So from a D4 to like a D12, maybe a D20. And then you're rolling against the dungeon master, who's rolling a D8, and you've got to beat him. So if you're rolling a D4 against a D8, then obviously your chances of winning are quite slim, but you can. And the same thing, like if you're rolling a D12 or potentially a D20 against a D8, you've got a much better chance, but you're not guaranteed. So it was an interesting resolution system in this one, but the main draw has to be the world itself, like the Discworld itself, and getting to live out adventures in this strange and fantastical universe. And players are very much encouraged to rely on puns and to inject humour into the game. So something a little lighter and hopefully fun as well.
Yeah, I wonder. I was thinking. I wonder, because Discworld is so much Terry Pratchett's style and sense of humor and that sort of thing. I think I have mixed feelings about the idea of playing in that world, because in many ways I wonder if I'd just be disappointed if my friends couldn't sort of live up to the standards of Terry Pratchett, and quite frankly I don't think any of us could, so it'd be very difficult. Whereas like
trying to if you're playing with people that are very subdued and don't know the world, it can be a different experience to those that have read all the books and those that, that live the humour, you know?
Yeah, I definitely think this would be for a group who live those books and know them inside out. Whereas I wonder also if like the silliness of the world puts more pressure on you to be entertaining and funny. Whereas like, you know, in many ways, it's the seriousness of the D&D worlds often leads to very comedic campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's almost like Forgotten Realms is the straight man to your comedic murder hobos, right?
Can be. Again, I mean, any game, any RPG lives or dies on its players and DMs and the interactions. So,
well, it's nice that they've made this available to people, and you know, I'll have to.
Yep, and just the way it fleshes out probably areas of the world that you don't get to see fully through the books, you know. That I always enjoy the source materials and the extra lore that comes with any RPG for existing IPs.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting actually with Discworld as well. Although I'm sure there must be tons of lore books and stuff out there. So in many ways, I bet this already has a ton of pre-existing content.
Similar to like Lord of the Rings or something. It's probably out there. But getting back to the core and the straight man world, that is new second edition of Trail of Cthulhu from Pelgrane Press. Trail of Cthulhu is set within the H.P. Lovecraft and mythos universe, similar to Call of Cthulhu, but this is based on the Gumshoe system, which was, you know, a hard-boiled detective origins adapted into the investigative elements of Cthulhu and looking into the monsters and mythos therein. And this is, I said, second edition, so there's a whole bunch of content for the first edition already out there. The primary difference between, say, Call of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu, I would say, is you can't miss clues in Trail of Cthulhu. You're just given the clues. So in Call of Cthulhu, you might have to roll a spot hidden check. You might have to do a library check to get the clues. In Trail of Cthulhu, there's no way, or it's much, much harder to miss a clue. So you can set up more complex mysteries. Because in Cthulhu, there's nothing worse than spending, and I've done that myself, you spend some time making something that they just need to move this out of the way to find the thing that's going to propel them to the next scene, and they don't do it. And you give me a spot hidden check, and they fail that check, and then you're like, okay, who's got the best occult skill or mythos skill? Somebody rolls and they fail that, and you're just like, okay, and they don't get that clue, and they move on to something else that's entirely irrelevant, and you don't get through the mystery part of it. So if you're playing Pulp Cthulhu, where you're doing a little more fighting, that's fine. But when you're playing the sort of straight version of the game, where it is, you know, any combat's potentially lethal, and you're really relying on solving this mystery for a big finale, Trail of Cthulhu is maybe a system you might want to look into, because you can make things more in depth.
Yeah, it's tough because you want to create those sort of scenarios where they really feel like they've worked hard to find the clue. Yeah. And then if they miss it, you've got to like try to pivot and improvise another way to find the clue that also feels rewarding. Yeah. You know, you can't just be like, oh, and on your way out, you trip over that clue that you missed. There's no catharsis in that.
Like, nobody's satisfied with that. It's like, oh, a cat knocks a book over and meows loudly. Go have a look, you know.
Yeah, like exactly. Suddenly, a book falls to the floor and a secret passageway opens.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's not as much fun.
Alcove, yeah.
But you'll notice, like, obviously, I quite like the investigative and adventure elements of RPGs here, and I did run so I've also backed the third case for the Blade Runner RPG, which again you're playing as a Blade Runner for investigating. That will be open for late pledges still, and I did play the first scenario again, and that wasn't so smooth. Like, players absolutely refused to pick up on the clues I was putting down. Like, I had to, there's one spoiler-ish alert. At one point, the players were kind of trapped in this house, but I had to make the antagonists leave to give them a chance to explore, and they immediately ran out and didn't look in any of the rooms. And I was like, but that's where I put all the clues now, because you've ran past them twice already. And it was just like, they just rushed to the end. They were like a day and a half early to the finale. And I just like, well, I'm just going to move it forward.
All right, we'll just skip over that part.
Yeah.
The clue finding part. The part where the Blade Runners are detectives.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I was just like, okay, we're moving on from that. Fine. But that was it. So it seems like, RPGs are big, whilst board games are away.
And you enjoyed despite that second play being a bit rough, you enjoyed Blade Runner enough to want to pick up the new set.
Yeah, I've got the second case file. The third case file comes with a better Games Master toolkit. So it gives you more for the mysteries. And again, Blade Runner, you're given physical handouts where you're analysing the crime scene to try and find the clues and the things that you're looking at. So again, that's more in line with what I want from these sort of investigative games than pure theatre of the mind kind of deal. Although we're going the other direction on Sunday with the Arkham Horror role-playing game, which is all maps and tokens and stats and dice pools and things to go on. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, I've got to bring us back on track with this one piece of news that I've uncovered. No, this will come as no surprise to anyone. You will have seen Bitewing Games promising the big announcement of their new Reiner Knizia big box game. Bitewing, you will probably be familiar with. They ran a campaign with 3 new... they've signed some kind of contract with Knizia where he's putting out a ton of new titles with them. And he did 3 new 2-player dueling titles. They ran a campaign for that not that long ago. They also put out Cascadero and Cascadia as well. Not Cascadia. What's the little one called? Cascadito. Cascadero and Cascadito. Which I was not super impressed with. Cascadero. I didn't play Cascadito yet, but I wasn't super impressed with Cascadero. We talked about it on a previous podcast. But they said Reiner Knizia's got a new big box game. And, when we think about Reiner Knizia big box, we think about probably Tigris Euphrates and Amun-Re. Knizia has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of titles, but those are the ones I think of. Those are the ones I think people would know.
Yeah.
And everything is sort of, he's really not known for sort of like big, heavy games. And I think those are the sort of the heaviest that his games get, really. And so I was awaiting the announcement, and they were like, surprise, it's not 1 new big box game, it's 3. So this is a bit like their triptych of 2-player dueling games from Knizia that they just crowdfunded. Now it's a triptych of space-themed big box, and you can't see this on the podcast, but on the video version, I'm doing inverted commas, big box Reiner Knizia games. So I looked into it. They released 3 overview videos, which are all between sort of 5 and 10 minutes long, covering the rules. I watched them all, and I started off watching the one for Silos. So the 3 games are called Silos, Ego, and Orbit. And I started off watching the video for Silos. I was like, this looks interesting. It's sort of like an area majority action claiming type deal. So you're trying to sort of set collect from these spaces by controlling them and gaining new actions. And then I started watching the video for the second game in the series called Ego. And I was like, this feels really familiar. I feel like I know Ego. And I looked it up on BGG because I was like, this isn't new, right? And BGG are like, no, this is a reprint of Beowulf the Legend. I was like, oh, I have that. I've got Beowulf the Legend. It's a 2005 title from Fantasy Flight Games. I've played it a bunch of times. So this is not a new game at all. So I looked into it, and actually Silos is also a reprint of a 2008 Reiner Knizia game called Municipium, where it's the same sort of thing, but it's ancient Rome instead of alien abductions. You're having votes in ancient Rome instead of abducting humans in sci-fi. So actually, of the 3 new big box games, the only actual new one is Orbit. The other 2 are reprints of older Knizia games, which is fine. I have no problem with them reprinting stuff. I like Beowulf the Legend. But it's worth noting that both Beowulf and Municipium are both 6 point something on BGG, and they're a bit of sort of an acquired taste. They're not like, Knizia's big hits, greatest record or whatever, greatest hits. So, and also having Beowulf the Legend, I definitely wouldn't class that as I guess I'm conflating big box with heavier. Because I just feel like that's the insinuation. But clearly the insinuation is no, just the box is physically larger. And I'm like, well, you can make the box as big as you want and call it, the huge box game. But if it's got the weight of Ra, like Ra Pharaoh Edition has a pretty big box, but it's still Ra, So I guess I was hoping for something of a bit more of a heavier option in the vein of Amun-Re or Tigris and Euphrates. And albeit, I would actually argue that Amun-Re is heavier just in terms of rules overhead than Tigris and Euphrates, albeit I think Tigris actually feels sort of heavier in terms of the depth of the strategy and things like that. But either way, none of them I think are on par with Amun-Re, really. With the exception of Municipium, I haven't played that. Orbit, I'm going on the impression I got from the rules video. People say Municipium sits somewhere between Ra and Amun-Re. Fine. It looked to me like it was, heavier than Ra for sure, but definitely not as heavy as Amun-Re. Albeit, Amun-Re is not all that heavy either. None of them are, right? That's kind of the point. So I like Beowulf the Legend. One of the things I would say about it is, it's effectively a track. You're all walking along a track. In Beowulf, you're all Vikings following Beowulf on his journey. In Ego, it looks like you're all spacefaring spaceships flying through space together on a track. And one of the things about Beowulf, the Legend, is that it's not really thematic, right? You're stopping off on these different spots along the track, and then these trigger different kinds of bidding and auction and push your luck phases. And that's about it, really. But it came with a little bit of flavor text at the back of the rulebook, so you could flip to the back of the rulebook, and it would highlight some of the bigger action spaces where more stuff happens. And it would be like, here's the part of the story of Beowulf that this is intended to tie into. And so you could read that to add some thematic flavor to what was otherwise quite a dry game of hand management and push your luck, auctioning and bidding. And I really like Push Your Luck. I like Auction. I like Beowulf. I also like that the flavor text option is there. Also, you can go onto BGG and download more flavor text that people have collated to fill in the missing spots. Well, actually, one person did it, and I should probably credit them. So more on that in a minute. But the point is, Beowulf, even though it came out like 20 years ago, is still quite acquirable on the secondhand market for like $15. And I didn't, looking at the video for Ego, which is much more abstract because it's sort of a space-themed version, why not pick up the $15 version first and just give it a try? The $15 version with a theme. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. I mean, it's not for everyone. That's why it's 6 point something and not, 10. But yeah, so the Expanded Legend of Beowulf version 2 by Caffeine Head on BGG is a nice little Word document that adds even more flavor to the game. So anyway, if you've been trying to get your hands on Beowulf the Legend and you really like the idea of it, that's fine. But like, for example, when you push your luck or you're bidding and you go all in and then it comes apart, in Beowulf you take wounds because the idea is you're fighting each other or you're fighting mythological creatures or enemies or stuff like that. You take wounds. And you don't want to take too many wounds because you're going to get penalized for those at the end. In Ego, you take the disapproval of the aliens, like bad alien vibe tokens.
Ooh. So
it's more abstract. They've just kind of taken that theme away and then just made it abstract space theme so it ties in with the trilogy. But it's worth noting that only one of these was designed as a space game. The other two are rethemed Beowulf and Ancient Rome. So take from that what you will. But I thought
That's fair.
But anyway, Beowulf is quite acquirable on the secondhand market, and I think even in Europe and in the States, I've seen copies floating around. It's not hard to get. So, well, I looked it up for the purpose of this piece, but I saw copies available. So, you can go out and try that if you want. There is a mini expansion, which might be the deal breaker for you. Personally, I think I'd rather have the theme of Beowulf than the more abstract space theme of Ego. But what Ego does do is it offers an expansion pack that comes with it, and this allows you to change the track. So Beowulf is a set board. Ego has a board that's made up of pieces, and those pieces can be interchanged. So it's got some more replayability in that sense. So if that's something that appeals to you, or if you've played Beowulf a lot and you love it, and you're like, I wish there was more variety here, then I think this is probably a good shout for you. But it is also like quite expensive. Whereas Beowulf on the secondhand market is really not expensive. So then
save us some money.
Did you watch the announcement for this? So
I've not seen the video. I did see the 3-game bundle.
So they dressed Rainer Knizia up in silver and had him pretend to be an alien, and as though he was like, he's been training you for years to be better people through games, and now he's finally delivered this sort of triptych of games as a sort of a test to see if we're ready to go and join the aliens amongst the stars. Honestly, a really fun little bit, and he clearly had a good time doing it. And I have no problem with that. But I do feel like the marketing on this was really pushing that these are 3 new big box Rainer Knizia games,
Yeah.
And it's really not that. It really is like reskins of older titles, with the exception of Orbit, which I'll talk about at the end. So Silos, which is Municipium, is basically a whole bunch of little area control sectors, and each sector has sort of 2 functions. It's got a unique action associated with it, as well as a sort of an income, right? And in Silos, you're abducting. Well, in Silos, you are collecting people. You want to get sets of 4 different people, or you can collect cows, which are wild, and then you turn in these sets for points, and it's a race to get to like 5 points, right? So you turn in a complete set, get a point, get 5 points, win the game. And where it's sort of interesting is you can control certain areas so that you take on passive benefits. Like controlling one area will let you upgrade one of your characters that's moving around, giving you area majority so that they count double. And other areas will trigger sort of passive actions that will go on to let you draw cards or play cards. And the cards all have sort of little benefits as well. And it looks like a neat game. I don't know how much has changed from the original. From what I can gather, I looked at the boards and the components of the original. Not a whole lot has changed. It looked very, very, very similar. Other than the theme, right? So I think in the original it was sort of a series of elections that were moving around districts. Now it's an alien spaceship that's moving around districts and abducting people. And if you have the majorities there, you get the people. And then you can trade them in as those sets later on. Again, it comes with an expansion, which I suspect is new content that wasn't available originally for Municipium. But, this looked neat. If you like area control games, if you like the sort of the games where you're trying to cover all your bases, but you can't because you're going to be spread too thin, then so you've got to prioritize and sort of gauge what other people are trying to do. I think you get something out of this, with a heavy caveat that, again, this is a reprint of a game that has 6.5 on BGG or something like that. So it's clearly a bit polarizing. And I didn't see any significant rules changes either. But I haven't played this one, so I don't know. And the last one, Orbit, is actually a new game. And what this is it's sort of a race around space. So each player is a little spaceship, and you've got a race track which consists of sites you'd like to visit. The board is a series of it's diamonds, actually, interlocking diamonds, and you sit on the points where the diamonds meet, and you move your little spaceship around those points, and you're going to get movement by playing cards. But the cards you play also move planets that are on the board along their tracks. So each track has a planet on it, which is its orbit. And the planet will move along the orbit when you play the card for movement. And you don't know what cards people are going to play, but you're trying to visit the planets, because then you can tick them off your list. And once you're first person to visit all the planets wins. And you can also land on the planets, and then when they move, they take you with them. So that's great if they're going in the direction you want to go, and not great if they're taking you in the direction you don't want to go. But it looked really neat. Like, it looked fun to me. It's effectively a hand management racing game where you've got these sort of, where it's free form. So there's not like a track. You're trying to visit these sites that are spread across the board. But, eventually everyone's going to be trying to visit that last site that they need, and everyone else is going to be trying to stop them. You don't know what's in people's hands, so you don't know what planets they can affect, but there were cards they were showing that change the direction of a planet. So you're like, okay, well, this planet's on that orbit, so if anyone plays a card that moves it, it's going to move in the direction I want to go, so I'll land on it. And then someone plays the Uno reverse card, and the planet turns around and goes back the other way, and you're like, oh, damn it. So, that looked like fun. I would like to give that a try. It's also not like anything I've seen from him, so that's interesting as well. But it's definitely not a big box game. If anything, it looked quite light and straightforward, and sort of middleweighty. Now, these are also not cheap. I think it's about $50 for each one. I think if you go all in on all three, it's close to $200 or £150, which is a lot of money for three games that are at most middleweight, like solid middleweight. Now, Bitewing do really nice productions. And these are all using art by Vincent Dutray, who everybody loves. And so, and so like, that's, I think that, you're not going to, if you've been desperately trying to find a reprint of Municipium, then, this is going to do a lot for you, I think.
Top of my Christmas list.
Well, exactly. But on the flip side, if you've never tried any Reiner Knizia games, I really don't think this is a jumping in point, because it's like the marketing all makes it look really light and fun and accessible with these new gorgeous productions. But actually, there's a ton of really solid Reiner Knizia middleweight titles out there already that are excellent and sort of known. These are actually one new game plus two reprints of his more polarizing minor titles. So, that's sort of my take on the new big
on that
secret epic big box Reiner Knizia game is what the Kickstarter's called.
Is that true?
Mm-hmm. It's in the URL.
Let me click it. So, yep, true enough. We'll have it. While I was listening to you talk there, I was clicking around and I discovered Beowulf, and then that said not to be confused with Knizia's earlier Beowulf title, the movie board game.
Yes, that is a good point.
Clicking through that was a re-implementation of Kingdoms, which was a 1994 game. But having come through to this, I now see that Kingdoms will be reprinted as Cosmolancer by Avalon Hill, either by the end of the year or start of next year. And Kingdoms I have played quite a lot of on the app, quite a fun little game. You have a grid of like a 6x5 grid. You're not drafting exactly, but you're pulling tiles and choosing where to put them down on your board, and you're trying to get your castles in the row and column with the most points based on combinations of what other tiles are in those rows and columns. And you're trying to cut people off with mountains, and you're trying to put down dragons on their side of the board that negate their points for their kingdom. Cosmolancer, I'm not sure who's doing the art on this one, but it's quite psychedelic with space whales, and it looks very updated. The core gameplay loop of Kingdoms is fine and fun. Be interesting to see if they do much with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to be a real sort of pilfering of Knizia's back catalogue.
It's always kind of been the case, I guess, and I think he's really pushing for it. Like he had was it Holy Grail Games, and then the licensing, and maybe I should speak to him about next time.
That was actually just Grail Games, and yeah, it's
just
really,
Grail Games.
Yeah, it was really interesting that Grail Games. Sorry, there was Holy Grail Games, who are now defunct, who are not the same as Grail Games, who are still printing games, I think, but they'd originally signed both Knizia and Dutray to do reprints of stuff, and they did Yellow and Yangtze there. They did The King's Road as well there, which was a reprint of an older Knizia title, I think. But then I guess they had some kind of dispute, and Knizia and Dutray both clearly went over to Bitewing.
Well, I should maybe reach out for the next Medici reprint to get my dream version.
You need to go to Awaken Realms. Get them to do the special edition treatment of Medici.
But it doesn't need that much, but yeah.
Well, yeah, but we're living in an age of extremes, Barry. You got to go.
That is true.
You got to. It's either got to be the size of Foundations of Rome, or we don't want to know about it.
Or no good. All true, all true.
So that's the end of the news, I think.
I'm just going to jump in with one last thing. Be remiss of me not to do it, and this isn't sponsored content, but you will find me in the videos for this Kickstarter, along with the website. And this is for the Excaliber game table by Arcadia Game Tables. So this is my friend Mark, and he has his own workshop, and he's creating game tables. So these game tables, the primary difference is that they actually look quite good as tables, and not just for gaming. But they have a whole bunch of extra features and add-ons, and that is currently running at the moment on Kickstarter. You can find it under the Excaliber game table, and if you watch the video, you'll see me playing a variety of games. There's a few too many top-down shots, and there's a few too little hairs on the top of my head, but I am there, and the tables are super functional. They are quite good looking, and you've got a lot of choices in terms of their customization. So
we've always got time to hype our friends' things, provided our friends make good stuff. So that's the news, and we're going to move straight into the played section. And I thought, why don't we kick off with something we've both played, Barry, and then we can go back and forth a little bit. But we'll... Well,
which one? We've played so many things the same.
Well, we've got some really cool stuff that we've both played that we're going to cover in this section. We both played Endeavor Deep Sea and also Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth, 2 games we're both excited about and we're going to talk about. But I thought before we get into the really cool hype stuff, why don't we talk about Arcs, because you finally played it.
I have finally played it, so you've been hyping up the campaign the last couple of podcasts.
Blinded Reach, yeah.
So I've not played the campaign, I've just played the core game, just the retail version as it comes in the box. And so this is Arcs, Later Games, Cove Early, Root and Oath Fame. And I understand it now, right? I had an abstract idea of it. I hadn't watched anybody play or anything along those lines. I had an abstract idea of how it worked, and then having now sat down, got to grips with the rules, and played around, or played a full game. Yeah, it was interesting, right? It was better than I thought. I thought, I'm not really going to like this. I'm not going to be super keen on the trick-taking element and not getting the actions you want and those kind of things, but it worked quite well. I will say that our first 2 chapters, or first 2 full rounds, we played incorrectly, and where any matching suit got the full number of actions, right? So it should just be if you've played the higher value of that suit, you get the full number of actions.
Yeah, you have to surpass.
Yeah, it wouldn't have made too much of a difference, but it would have made enough of a difference that the game would have been a little more crunchy.
The action economy is super tight.
Yeah, so we had a lot of ships. So we were doing a lot of combat, which I imagine the full game probably, or the proper version of the game, probably doesn't have quite as much as we did. I had all 15 of my ships on the board at one point.
So I don't know if I've ever seen anyone get all their ships out. And in my experience, Arcs usually ends with a very small number of ships left.
Yeah, no, I still had all of mine, because we had that early game where we had enough ships out. And I also played initially the rules as Twilight Imperium damage and not Arcs damage. So where Imperium defender assigns damage. In arcs, I believe the attacker assigns all damage. Unless, again, incorrect on that one, but we initially did it defender chooses and then we went to attacker chooses, so there was more.
No, you are correct. The attacker assigns damage in arcs, yes.
But the game played out fine, and then
how many
problem
how many players did you have?
4.
So the full complement. You got to use the 7s and the 1s.
We got to use the 7s and the 1s, which mattered, and actually just even the understanding how to activate the objectives for the turn became interesting. And then it was only later in the game where we realised how strong some of the powers were. Things like not losing your value when you declare an objective. Yeah. In the Mesmer objective.
Right,
I forget
you're
what
talking
called.
about the guild cards that give you the passive benefits.
Yeah. And so like initially you look at them and you're like, I don't know why anybody would want that. And then you're like, oh, actually, no, that does make sense why I would do that. And the reason we didn't initially grok it was because we were getting the full pips as long as you played the matching suit. But now we're like, oh, if you put out a 6 of something and declare an objective and it's still a 6, then that's quite strong for nobody else coming in behind you to do anything bad.
Yeah, it's really powerful denial.
Yeah. And so, I definitely want to play it again. We didn't play the leaders and lore, just very much the base game as is. But we'll include those next time and see how it goes with the full proper rules. And I'd be interested to see how much, how much sadder everybody is with their actions when you're only getting one at a time.
I think leaders and lore helps somewhat with giving you a sense of direction. The one thing I would caution you with it, because I played it several times before we introduced those, and I think I initially said on the podcast I was really pleased we played without them. I've had mixed feedback from people who've dived straight in with them, but the one thing I would say is it is a draft. They're distributed via draft at the start, and it is very possible to draft badly, which can lead to a difficult start. So so make sure everyone reads them and has a good idea about how they function before that draft begins, because the game is so competitive. You can't really sit there and be like, well, if you tried that with this, that'd be a cool combo, because you're just sitting there praying they don't take the one you want. No,
it was decent. We had a player there that didn't like root very much, and they liked arcs a lot better than root.
I think arcs, by dint of not being as asymmetrical as root, or basically not asymmetrical at all until you put leaders and lore in, I think it's actually more accessible. I mean, the rules grid is unintuitive, I think, only because it is unusual, right? Because even by dint of trick-taking games, because it's not about winning the tricks, right? Like, that's not really a concept that comes into it. It's really more about what you can do by leading with certain cards, and then also sort of holding on to power. So you want to hold on to the lead as long as you can, because by holding on to the lead, you can get the most mileage out of your hand. But invariably, people can just take the lead from you by sacking off a card from their hand. And that happens a lot with experienced players. If people aren't binning a card to take the lead, then they're probably inexperienced and don't really know how to value their hand, in my experience.
There's a lot of 7s in a 4-player game. So.
Right, and the 7s allow you to claim, provided no one else has claimed yet, right? Yeah. So you've got to be mindful of that. But I mean, there's also a bunch of cards that don't come out, and then, the 7 can only be played to do that if you're following suit. I found actually in the games I've played with 4-player, it's very difficult to claim with the 7 because very often people have already claimed, and then I'm wound up holding this rubbish 7 for ages.
Yeah,
I think actually the real value of the 7, in my experience, is the wild ambition on it. Because when you play a 7,
leading with a 7, making it a 0.
Well,
but being able to get the ambition that you want.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to switch on these round-to-round goals, and the 7 can switch on anything. So if you've not got the ambition in your hand that you want to declare, the 7 is going to help that.
I think we struggled a little bit in learning from the rulebook. For nobody played before, nobody really watched the video. We started watching the video, but they're all 30 minutes, and I'm like, actually, once we got going, somebody could have easily just kept us right a bit better, and taught it a lot quicker, I think. So it's I don't think it's that complicated, the flow of the game, but I do think it's quite a difficult one to make sure everybody's doing everything right to begin with.
Listen, Leader Games, I've played a shitload of arcs, so if you want a rules video, hit me up.
Do a fast one, though.
What's fast?
I don't have 27 minutes to learn the rules to a game.
What's fast?
What's fast? The minimum, like, 7 or 8 minutes is a good rules teach to my mind.
So you want me to teach arcs in 7 to 8 minutes?
Yeah. I don't think, you don't need to tell me what trick taking is. I know what trick taking is.
Right, we can skip
You just need to tell me. Yeah,
well, I don't know if I would start teaching arcs by explaining trick taking, because if people don't know what that is, then it's pointless to explain how trick taking works.
But no, it was good. It was good. I'll definitely play it again. I can put it in the same bucket as say Root. I know they're quite different games, but in terms of the just the broad.
Well, I suppose in terms of the vicious competitiveness, but I think Root has more scope for player diplomacy at the table, around the table. You know, sort of like, we got to gang up on that guy now, or that person. Whereas Arcs feels more like sort of opportunism, like, I know you're not winning, but also I need to do this thing and you're there. Because the action economy is so savage. You know, it's not, I don't have time to fly across space to try and attack the person who's winning. So I'm just going to try to beat them by picking on you. Sorry. The other thing about Arcs, though, is it's still easier to teach than Root by a considerable margin. And
I'll have to teach one game.
Yeah, well, exactly. Root with all new players is a big huge teach. Arcs much faster to teach and faster to play, I think, as well. I mean, Root with people who are all across it can be pretty quick, but I think Arcs is still quicker.
I've played up to like 6-player Root. And I will say there was a gang up on the leader moment. There was a guild card where you controlled the fuel. Yep. And very early on, so one of the players took that card and declared that ambition for having the resources, and so the whole round was basically the back and forth between raiding the player that had this card to try and take it from them. Yeah. Because it was the 5 points for that round, and you got the tokens back from people if they hadn't used them at the end of the round. So it was round 3 was an intense one. Chapter 3 was an intense one.
Yeah, that's the fuel cartel. I'm trying to remember what the ambition's called, but I've forgotten. Good stuff. Well, it's clearly been too long since I've played Arcs, because I'm struggling to remember bits and pieces of the rules. I should get Arcs back to the table. Maybe play the basic game with the Leaders and Lore expansion, because I've since only played very weird 12-hour Arcs. So if Arcs is designed by Cole Worley, who comes out of the school of war games and historical games, Altay Dawn of Civilization, published by Ares Games, is designed by Paolo Mori, who kind of comes from that same school, but also designed by Ole Steines, who comes from the school of Champions of Midgard. And more recently, Deep Rock Galactic, the board game.
Yeah.
I was so hyped for Altay Dawn of Civilization going into Essen. It was, if you listen to episode 13, my number one most hyped game at Essen. And so I went straight there and I bought a copy because I was worried I wouldn't get one. And it is sort of like Dominion with a map. You've got a board, you're asymmetrical fantasy races. You got your elves, orcs, humans, and dark elves. But the asymmetry sort of ends at the starting decks, which are slightly different, right? So it's not super asymmetrical. Other than your starting cards with their minor differences, the rest of it's all the same. And it has a face-up kingdom of cards, just like Dominion. It's a deck building game. You're going to be sacking off cards from your starting deck and buying cards from this open marketplace. And then it is a civilization game. So you're putting buildings out into these territories on the board. You're expanding out across the board. And then there's a second marketplace of face-up cards, which are technologies. And they come in 3 levels. And you have these sort of basic bronze technologies that just give you light asymmetrical powers and let you do things like cycle your hand or trash cards, stuff like that. You've got level 2 cards, or level 2 technologies, and you can't build a level 2 technology until you have a level 1 technology. And then if you want to build a second level 2, you need a second level 1, so you can only go up the chain once each time. But the level 2 ones are slightly better, slightly more powerful. They might let you draw an extra card at the beginning of your turn or something like that, or just passively generate a resource that you need. And then the level 3 technology cards are endgame, asymmetrical endgame scoring conditions. And so you can start to build those and develop your endgame criteria. So we played it at 4, and in your hand, you've got cards that give you the different resources. And the different resources are typically used to buy more cards from the marketplace. They can also be used to complete the technologies, and you must spend them all on your turn. So like the money in Dominion, you play out the resource cards, but unlike money in Dominion, there's different types of resources in this, and you're going to get a pool of resources. You must spend them before the end of your turn, or else they're lost. But there is an optional rule, and when Chris and Michael played it at the UKG, it was a mandatory rule. So it's become optional at some point between that prototype and the final version, where every resource you sack off unspent at the end of your turn, you gain a coin, and then you can change 5 coins for a wild resource. And we played with that. I would point out the game comes with an enormous number of coins. So if you're not playing with the variant, you won't use them. So it seems very strange to have so much punch board for something that is optional and could be omitted. So my impression is that this is a mandatory rule, and for some reason it's labeled as optional. I don't know why. There's clearly some disagreement somewhere between either the publisher or the designers or something. I don't know. But either way, they couldn't decide. But we played it with that optional rule. But you're going to start off the kingdom piles are all going to be things that get you more resources, or they're going to be combat cards, or they're going to help you build settlements. I mean, that's functionally what the 3 cards sort of do. Unlike Dominion, you don't have buys where that determine how many cards you can buy from the market at the end of your turn. Instead, you can just buy as many cards as you can afford, but only one of each named card. So you can have multiple farmers, but you can only buy 1 farmer per turn. And then each stack of cards also has a special one on top, which is slightly more expensive, but also has endgame scoring on it. So just a couple of extra points. Nothing significant, but you pay a bit extra to sort of unlock that stack, and now everyone can buy them. They're slightly cheaper, but the one you bought is worth some points. In addition to using this money to buy the cards, you can also take the technologies. You can take any technology that's available in the marketplace as long as you have a resource to start building it. And you can apply as many resources as you want to the technology cards until they're filled. So they'll sit in your player area. You fill them up with the resources as you acquire them, and then when you complete the technology, it becomes active in your play area. The catch is that you can only be doing one technology at a time. So you can always sack one off, you can always abandon a technology, but the resources you've invested in it are lost. So you ideally want to be taking things that you're actually interested in and that you're going to finish. And then you've got the cards that you play from your hand, which let you put out more settlements on the board. So this is how you're going to expand across the territories on the board. And you've got all these little settlement pieces, and you can build up to 4 settlements per territory, but you can have as few as 1, and you just expand outwards across the board. Each territory that you occupy at the end of the game is going to be worth a point, but eventually you're going to brush up against your opponents, and this is where you're going to have a fight. And when you fight, what you do is you just pick a territory adjacent to their territory, and then you play these combat cards from your hand, which have a sort of a total combat value. And then your opponent can deploy combat cards from their hand which have defense on them. And there's only combat cards, and they're 1, 2s, and 3s, and they all have 1 attack and 1 defense. So, or 2 attack and 2 defense, you know? So it's not like you're either going defensive or aggressive and you're trying to decide what to put in your deck. No, you get combat cards and they do both. So then your opponent discards cards. If they're the defender, if they match you, then it's a tie and nothing happens, ends in a stalemate. If they beat you, you lose a settlement from the territory you were attacking out of. And if you beat them, they lose a settlement from the territory you were attacking into. In addition to the values you're playing from your hands, you also add 1 for every settlement in the 2 territories that are in combat. And then when the settlements are destroyed, they go to the person that killed them. Whether they were the attacker or the defender, they're worth a point at the end. So you're collecting your opponent's settlements. Because putting the settlements out and then losing them or gaining them from your opponents is the end of the game condition. Once someone has run out of settlements, finish the round, game over, we'll go to final scoring. And there's some nice nuance around combat as well, because if you don't think you can win, then you can politely bow out, but you can cycle your hand, basically as a sort of a comeuppance for voluntarily losing a combat. And if you do lose the combat anyway, you're still going to draw back up to your maximum hand size before the start of your turn. So you've basically spent your combat cards, but now you're going to get some more. So the question is, were you hoping to use those combat cards for combat on your turn? And is that more important than succeeding in a defense now? But you'll still have full information. It's totally binary. So you don't have to play the combat cards if they're not going to have an effect, unless you want to, in order to get rid of them to draw new cards. Mm-hmm. So all of that was really nice. And I was playing as the orcs, who are the sort of the more aggressive one. But the other thing is everyone starts with 1 level 3 technology card. And you don't have to build it, but you can reveal it. So it's hidden, and you can reveal it at any point to start working on it. And if you finish the one that you were given at the start of the game, then you get 3 bonus points during endgame scoring. And this is a game that scores between like sort of 20 and 30 victory points. So like 3 is a lot. Mm-hmm. We played 4-player. I quite enjoyed it. It was definitely not setting my world on fire. I was hoping it would be a lot more exciting than it was. So maybe this is a case of overhype. I'm not saying it's bad, but there were sort of a couple of observations I made. One is that it didn't feel as streamlined as I expected. Because Ares is a really big, well, I say really big. Ares is a reasonably big publisher. Paolo Mori and Ollie Steinus are both very experienced designers at this point. I really expected it to feel very streamlined, but actually the variant with the coins and the starting level 3 technology that was worth 3 points both felt very strange. Like Chris said that when they played the prototype at the UKG, it didn't have that starting technology at all. And the fact that not only do you have a starting technology, but A, you can't pick it, and B, it's worth extra points, really feels like it sort of locks you into a particular strategy that you kind of have to focus on. Because in our game, those 3 points were absolutely crucial. And made and determined the outcome of the game, really. But I wouldn't have put that in. I think, starting off with a technology like that, fine. It gives new players something to build towards. Feel like they've got sort of exclusive access to something that they can work towards, and they're not going to be disappointed if they lose it. Great. But the fact that it's worth 3 extra points, really bizarre decision. Don't know why it's worth 3 extra points. If you don't do it, it's like, okay, not only do you have this option, but now you have to do it. And for people who don't really get a technology that syncs up with what they're doing, or because of the way the game is evolved, they're not going to be able to do it. It's almost like, oh, now I've lost. I'm not going to put all the time into this level 3 technology because they're not cheap. In our game, I was the only one that did any level 3 technology. another player was one turn away from completing it. So, and then the other two players couldn't do it at all. So it's not like, you're doing tons of level 3s and this is just one that you can optionally ignore. It's like if you get to do one level 3, that's notable, I suppose. I mean, maybe if you're a lot better at the game, this is our first play. But in any case, there was stuff I liked, though. I got a trash card really early on, so I was able to really streamline my deck. I really enjoyed that. I also made blunders buying cards that meant that the streamlining process was somewhat undermined by my own ineptitude, which I liked. It means there's sort of strategic horizons and, I can get better at it. I really appreciated that. I wanted, as the orcs, I wanted to be very aggressive and sort of expand out across the map. But the level 3 technology I had started with was aqueducts, which rewards me for putting a bunch of settlements in the same territory. So actually, instead of expanding aggressively, I kind of just built up around my starting area instead, which again is sort of like this unintuitive thing with those starting techs. I'm surprised that's not an optional rule. I don't see why that needs to be in there at all. I would either add an opening draft or take that one out altogether. I don't know why it's there.
Everything you've described sounds interesting and fun. And you said that the starting decks are minimally asymmetric.
Yep.
It sounds like that they included that level 3 technology potentially because not enough people were getting to those level 3s, and potentially to vary that starting asymmetry. But it feels like there should probably be starting technologies.
Yes.
But rather than generic.
Yeah, some asymmetrical starting techs, that would have been, I think, a better option. But it depends
going from 4 different beginnings to potentially 16 different beginnings. Or in fact, that's not that works, is it?
Oh, I see what you mean. So you're getting a starting species and also a starting technology. I was thinking the orc starting deck would come with an orc starting technology as well.
Possibly. There's different ways to go with it.
Yeah, I guess the point is there's options here, and it seems peculiar that they went down this route.
Yeah. Well, I'd actually think maybe they'd already locked in much of the production.
Yeah.
While still playtesting's like, we need to do something. What can we do with what we've got?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised. Very often during the production, the rule books are printed last so that you can sort of deliver the files as late as possible, so you can keep working on that. But, in this case, particularly with the coins, that's Punchboard. That was definitely in production earlier on. So I guess the late addition, if there was one at all, would have been to make it optional. But the other thing I'd mention is that I was not playing as aggressively as I might have, but I was watching across the other corner of the board, because we're all sort of in different corners, and then we're around a lake, right? So I'm functionally next to 2 neighbors, and the person on the opposite side of the lake to me, I'm almost never going to meet them, right? I'd have to expand very aggressively, and I wasn't because of the aqueduct. But they were playing very aggressively and expanding very aggressively, and this meant that particularly the player between us on one side was reduced to 3 territories before the end of the game. And it would have been nice for me to have a bit more agency to get over there and combat the person who is my primary competitor, rather than, picking on the 2 people I was neighbors with who were not my main competitors. Having said that...
Did you get the Seafarers promo?
I did, and I'm about to talk about that. So there is... so the 2 things I would note just about that very quickly is that the person who ended up with 3 territories still actually scored quite well. So that's not the end of the world for them, although they did not feel good during the game about it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that the game came with a Seafarers promo. So this is this is just another face-up card that goes into that set just like everything else. It's just an additional thing. I wanted to play without it first because I wanted to play the game, as it's going to come packaged for everyone else before adding it. Because what it allows you to do is travel across that lake. Or in this case, there's 2 lakes, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is it lets you cross water. So it would have given me a route to going and attacking this other player. Now, whether it is quite difficult to attack from the water, and there's an island in the middle of the lake that you can populate, but really that's kind of just shoring up points because attacking into the island and attacking out of the island are both also still quite difficult. So it depends on sort of my opponent, their hand, how much combat cards they've bought, whether or not I could actually have crossed the lake and sort of sufficiently established myself on the far side to sort of create a breach in their defenses. But it certainly would have given me an option where I didn't really have one. And again, I could have actually spread out across to get them, but I would have left myself very vulnerable to the player who was getting beaten up on. And I would have also had to sack off scoring the aqueduct or scoring max points for the aqueduct, which just meant it seemed not worth it. So I think that's sort of, I'm keen to play it again. I enjoyed the play. I think I am a little concerned that the other thing was the ties in combat. Like quite a certain number of combats were ending with just nothing happening because players were reaching a stalemate and then just playing and they were just tying.
Well, have you the way you described the game? There's some unique elements there. Certainly, the game it sounds most similar to, although I can see the differences, is Tyrants of the Underdark. Have you played that at all?
I have not played it. It's one of those games that I keep meaning to play and have.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I have the old version with the expansions, but it's a similar thing. You've got the board. There's a lot more locations by the looks of things, and the routes through them are quite different, but it is a deck builder, combat, dudes on a map type combat game, similar to this. It doesn't have the technologies as such, but there's another mechanism for promoting your cards. So when you basically when you're trashing your cards, you can get points for the ones you've trashed. So while they're in your deck, they're worth 1 point, and when you've trashed them, they're worth 3 points, or whatever. Every card's different depending on what the ability is. And so towards the end of the game, it's a rush to promote as many cards as possible, while still getting the full use of them throughout the game. But the combat in that one is much more... There's always something going on. You're always fighting. You've got spies that can sneak into areas to open them up. That you're constantly taking places and losing places. And it's a great game. And the way you described Altay also sounded very much like that kind of thing, where you're using your hand to attack, defend, whilst building up your deck. And it seemed, if it was comparable, I thought it might be something I'd be super interested in. I really like the ideas of the technologies, but if you're saying they're so hard to complete, maybe it's not as exciting as I might have thought.
Well, certainly the level 1s and 2s are quite doable. Like by the end of the game, I'd achieved, I think, 3 level 1s, 2 level 2s, and then that 1 level 3. And the 1 level 3s are less exciting because they're just endgame scoring. So it's sort of just like, what are you sort of building towards? I do think it would be nice to have been able to work on maybe a level 3 in addition to others, because if you wait too long to claim a level 3, you can't really feasibly build towards that as a strategy. And maybe that's the problem they were trying to solve with the starting one. Yeah. But again, then that locks you too much into it. So I don't know, maybe the answer was make the endgame scoring technologies just a separate marketplace that's sort of independent of the others. But the one thing I would say as well, like, while I am really keen to play Tyrants of the Underdark and give that a try, it's also super out of print. So,
well, it was reprinted. It might still be back out of print again, but it was... There was a big coffin box, and then it was reprinted in the normal square box with all the expansions. And that might now be out of print. It's Gale Force 9, right?
Yeah, I don't think you can get it anywhere.
There's a whole bunch of fan expansions as well for this one, because it was pretty much abandoned after the
Yeah, my friends played the fan expansions at.
Oh yeah, he said wasn't good.
Yeah, they were not impressed with the balance. So,
but the core game is great. In fact, I think I probably rated it an 8. Yeah, I rated it an 8. Sad that it wasn't better because it sounded very much up my street.
this is what I'm conscious of. I don't want this to sound like too much of a disappointment because actually I did enjoy my play of it. I think I just had really, really high expectations, partly because of Paolo Mori's influence, partly because everyone had enjoyed their play at the UKG so much, and partly because of Ollie Steinus as well. And Ares as a publisher I think is very competent. Their catalog is largely solid titles. So, and they've got access to that, to some great fantasy art as well. They did the Sword and Sorcery series. They've done all the War of the Ring stuff. So, they've got good sensibilities on that front. So I was really hyped for this, and in the end, I thought it was just okay, and I could see the sort of the deck building Euro-y part of it. Not really satisfying the people who are hoping for more argy-bargy on the board, and the argy-bargy on the board upsetting the people who are into more purist deck building stuff.
Right, yeah.
So it's like, while I like this combo, this appeals to me, it might be the same reason why Tyrants, despite being a great game, is also hard to find and out of print. Because I guess there's, more people who are either into Dominion or, dudes on a map than there are actual people who are into a hybrid version of that. But I do think if this sort of if you like sort of Dominion style deck building stuff, if this sort of sounds like, something that's up your street, Altay's not super expensive, right? I think it's like 40 euros. I think it was like 40 euros at Essen. So it's not like outrageously expensive. There was a deluxe component set. They were not very nice. The wooden ones that come in the box are awesome. So I didn't even buy the deluxe components. But I do think the Seafarers should have been in the box.
Well, that's the first expansion, right?
Well, it's a promo that they gave away at Essen.
No. So yes, that is the promo, but the Seafarers is going to be an expansion.
Great.
So new game board, new cards, and some tokens.
Good stuff. Well, I think that's really important because like I said, that sort of inability to cross the water sort of really inhibited us. But I also feel myself wanting to house rule that starting technology card as well. I think what I'd probably do is just take away the 3 bonus points. Don't know why they're attached to it. Don't seem to add anything.
I don't know. If you're saying that the technology itself already provides points because it is endgame scoring, then...
Yeah, and it's a way of giving you something to work towards if you're very concerned that you're only going to be getting an endgame scoring technology after you've developed a civilization that goes in some direction, which is a fair enough concern, and I think that this sort of helps to address it, but I just don't know why there's 3 extra points for people that actually did it.
Fair.
Because it just penalizes people who decided to pivot to something else later.
But similarly, you've worked towards it for the whole game, so...
Yeah, but that in itself is an advantage, being able to focus on something and concentrate on it, right?
Depends what the other players are doing. Tricky one. Like, I can see where they've had the problems and had to...
Yeah, but nobody else knows what it is. It's not like, I mean, you have to flip it up and start working on it before anyone could feasibly thwart you. And by that point, other people might be... Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just there's some sort of minor points. I'm definitely keen to play Altay again. I also think it's probably best at 3 or 4 rather than 2. There's not a solo mode, so it's just at most a 2-player game. I mean, at least a 2-player game.
Well, speaking of games that are up my alley, I played, not new, but new to me, 2-player, well, 2 to 4-player competitive card game in the form of 7th Sea, City of the 5 Sails. Now, I've spoken about this IP once before for the side quest 7th Sea escape game box, and I said at the time I had no further insights into the 7th Sea world from that escape game box, and it was entirely themeless. But this is a re-implementation of the collectible card game as an expandable card game. So the same as, say, Legend of the 5 Rings, went from a collectible card game to a different version under FFG as a living card game. So this is produced by Pinebox Entertainment, who also do Doomtown in the same method, and Robert Croy, among several others, is the lead developer. So this game is 2 to 4 players, generally 2 players, though the multiplayer's an afterthought, shall we say. And it's a constructed deck card game where you have a small deck of plots and characters, and a larger deck filled with characters and items and events and all those good card game stuff. The aim of the game is to control the 3 areas of the city. So there's like the docks, the forum, something else. And there's also a city deck, which is independent from the player decks. And every turn, a card comes out from the city deck onto each of these 3 locations. And that gives you some focus for what you want to be working on that turn. Players pick a character and a plot from their constructed deck. Reveal both of those. Whoever has the highest initiative goes first. But the plots will do something to change up the rules for that turn. They'll also determine where you put the resources that you're competing for. Because another way of winning the game is to have 7... It's not honour. Forget what it's called. But if you get 7... Renown. I think it's renown. Basically, you're vying for control of these 3 areas. If you ever control all 3 at the end of the round, you win. Alternatively, you can get 7 renown. I forget what it's called. If you have 7 at the end of the round, you win. Or you can hunt down your opponent's leader. And if you kill their opponent's leader, if you're the only person with a leader left at the end of the round, you win. And so the game plays out as you might expect. Cards are paid for using cards in your hand. So that's an interesting mechanism I always like. You know, the cost benefit between playing a card from your hand and using it to pay for other cards to play more powerful cards. A lot of the cards are relatively cheap, 0, 1, 2, 3. There are a couple that are bigger. And you're playing your characters out. They're going to the locations. They're maybe exhausting to do an action. And that action could be to obtain the cards that are in play at these areas. It could be to attack another player. And that's one of the more interesting parts of the game. So the combat mechanism in this game is playing cards from your hand in the form of back and forth thrusts and parries. So you initiate an attack by exhausting. You have an initial value of, say, 2 attack. And so you put 2 threat tokens in front of whoever you're attacking on the other side. That player can then just give up. They can take the hits and it goes towards their maximum wounds. Or they can play a card from their hand. And every card in your main constructed deck has 3 icons to do different things. The first one is parry. So when you parry an attack, you'll move a threat from in front of you to in front of the opponent. You've parried that attack and you're on the counter. You can block, which just removes a hit or a threat from in front of you. And then there's the thrust, which adds additional attack to whatever you've just countered. And it could be that the card you played doesn't have any parry and it's all block, or it could be all parry, or it could be a combination of the 3 of them. And it goes back and forward until one player decides to until there's no threat in front of the other player. So what you're trying to do, of course, is put as much threat on the other player so they take the wounds. Some of the cards you play have maneuvers on them, I want to say it's called, where it does a special action during combat. And it's super, again, you're using up your cards from your hand to perform this combat. There is also an element of gambling, where instead of playing a card from your hand, you can look at 2 cards from the top of your deck and play one of them. The other one goes to the bottom of your deck. And you can do that up to your agility value. So having characters with high agility, typically good in combat, because you can take cards off the top of your deck. You're not spending them from your hand. And there's lots of really good things to like about this game. It's unique enough that I say it has a place in people's collections. I've got a lot of 2-player card games. It takes a lot to impress me or to want to keep or play more of this one. The downside of the game at the moment is that it's lacking in deck building options. There's the core set, which has enough cards for 2 players to have sort of full competitive decks as best they can. And there's only one small box expansion, and there's only looking to be one small box expansion next year as well. There might be a second, but it's very slow to release new cards, which makes the deck building quite what's the word I'm after there? Not terribly varied in terms of what you can do with those cards. But it has a lot of potential. Now, if you played the original card game, the original CCG, you're maybe not going to like this. It's quite a different game. But I had a decent amount of fun with it. I think it's worth keeping. I think it's worth getting into the deck building once more cards are there. And certainly something that's going to be in rotation for my 2-player card game slot. I've not tried it at more players. It does say in the rulebook that the multiplayer is effectively an add-on. It's all balanced and designed around 2-player, but you can add in a 3rd or 4th player, which adds additional locations. So you're vying over different areas. And yeah, it was good fun. It's a thumbs up for me. And as I said, I've played a lot of card games recently that didn't do a lot for me, so it was good to find this.
And when you say deck building, you're meaning like deck construction, right?
Deck construction, yeah.
So, well, I think, one small box expansion a year is the kind of deck construction I could actually keep up with.
Yeah, there's 60, no, it was 115 cards, but that's split among 3 copies of every card, or every card that's not a unique card, and across 5 factions. So there was only really 15 new cards for each of the 5 factions, along with the neutrals. So there wasn't a huge amount of deck building. I will say I've got 5 what I think are fairly solid decks out of a single core set and a single copy of the expansion. So your value wise, you're not having to go chasing down multiple copies of things to get good decks.
Very good stuff. Well, it's nice when publishers sort of pop up and keep these sort of fan-supported endeavors alive, That's good stuff. And it's clearly found its audience. And maybe, who knows, maybe 7th Sea will be the one that grows up for them, because as you say, it's landed well with you and you play a lot of these sorts of things. So I've been playing a 4X game from 5 years ago called Era of Tribes. And on the subject of indie, this is very much an indie game. It's it's an endeavor by the designer Arne Lorenz, and it's published by Black Beacon Games. And I believe this is self-published through crowdfunding. I think that's his own company. They're called, or abbreviated to BBG on the box. And this was crowdfunded, delivered, and selling in 2019. And I remember seeing it around at Essen years ago when we went there. I sort of passed it by. I was like, oh, Era of Tribes. That looks like sort of, area control on a map, sort of civilization building. I like that sort of stuff. But then I never actually got around to trying it. And Arne has brought out a plan for a reprint with a new expansion, which is coming to crowdfunding in early November. And so asked if he could send me a copy, and I said I'd play it and I'd talk about it on the podcast. And here it is. This is a 1 to 4 player competitive civilization building game, 4X style game, with solo and cooperative variants. There is a 5 to 6 player expansion, and with the 5 to 6 player expansion, you can also expand the 2-player co-op to 3-player co-op. This version I have is the 2nd edition, but it's notable that when Arne sent it to me, it came with a ton of stickers to put across everything. So there's clearly a 3rd edition, I guess, version. That's probably what will be coming to crowdfunding, although I don't know how much that will resemble the edition that's finally delivered to people based on the success of the campaign. There is also a copy of the expansion that they sent me, but I haven't had a chance to play it. I've just played the core game. It's quite a heavy game. I played it at 3 players. None of us had played it before. I learned the rules, and the rule book is quite substantial. At its core, it is a map of Europe and outer territories, so the whole Mediterranean and some of the East as well. And you will block off sections of the board based on where you want to play, based on your player count. And again, it's sort of flexible. It says, if you don't like the conflict part of the game, if you want more freedom, then you just don't block off any parts of the board, But if you want people to be engaging in the combat side of the game, then, block off this much of the board, play with these areas. And then each tribe is a European civilization or sort of Mediterranean civilization, that sort of area. So if you block off the north, you'll be playing with the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Iberians. If you block off the south, you'll have the Gauls, the Gaelic, that kind of stuff. And so in our game, we blocked off the north part of the board. We're playing on the south part of the board, and when you take your tribe, it will also give you your starting territories on the map. And each territory will have some food, which is absolutely vital to feed your civilization, and some resources, which come in 2 types. There's luxury resources, which are largely interchangeable. There are many types of them, wine, silk, iPhones, but there is no real difference unless you're specifically a tribe that will reference the luxury resources. So certain tribes can do things with beer or wine, but we didn't have any of those tribes. So we were just only caring about luxury resources. And then there's some war resources as well, horses and ore that you can use to bolster your armies. So you lay out on the board, you get those things. Everyone gets a little hidden objective tile. Some more objective tiles come out on the board. And then the game is set up so that there are certain end game conditions. So you occupy 25 land territories. That triggers the end game. We played what is called the normal game. You can play the longer game and the epic game. You will go advance through eras. So I think the 4th era is called Ancient Times. And if you're playing the normal game, somebody getting to Ancient Times also triggers the end of the game. You can go all the way up through medieval times and things like that, though, if you're playing a longer version. There is an endgame trigger where someone, I think, I can't remember what the other ones are. Build all your cities, I think, might be one of them. Research a certain number of technologies is definitely one of them. There is a very intriguing technology rondelle where it does something I like, actually, where technologies become cheaper when other people have researched them, but you get points for researching the most. You have a victory point tracker around the board, and also what's called your victory parade. And the victory parade is a little token that advances around the victory points track in the opposite direction whenever you win combats. And then it gives you bonuses as it advances. And if the 2 tokens cross, that's another endgame condition. So, you've got these different endgame triggers, and then you'll go to a sort of a final scoring where everyone will total up their endgame scoring, and then whoever has the most points is the winner, with some tie breaks as well. And round to round, all you've got is a player board with all the actions you can take on it. So it's not worker placement. You're not competing for action spots. Everyone's got their own unique action spots on their board. And you've got these leaders and the luxury resources, and you commit them to action spots on your board in order to generate what you need. And the core game loop is really focused around this one action called expansion, because expansion allows you to conquer more territories. It also allows you to go into conflict. So if you occupy a territory with barbarians or a rival player at the end of your expansion action, that will trigger conflict. There is also, notably, an auto-expansion phase, which happens at the end of everyone's actions. So functionally, you're going to be using these leaders, which are a bit like workers, to trigger the actions on your board, but you can commit multiple leaders to the same action in order to power it up. So you could blow through all your leaders on your first turn, doing one big action, and then just pass for the round. Or alternatively, you can take lots of different actions, but you can't take the same action twice using in the same round. So, if you want a big version of it, you have to commit to it all at once. But later on, when you get 3 or 4 leaders, you could do, one minor action to start and then maybe put 2 leaders into something else later on. And after everyone's passed, you're going to go into the auto expansion phase where everyone gets a free expansion action unless you did one earlier. And so planning around that is like kind of an important consideration. But if you do it as an action on your turn, you can commit leaders to it, which power it up, which means that it might be more worthwhile doing it on your turn. Additionally, you might be contesting territory with people, so if you're worried they're going to expand into those spaces you want, again, you might take the expansion action on your turn to make sure you can guarantee get the spots you want. So there's this morale track, which is tracking the sort of how happy people are in your civilization, and that goes down constantly. You'll fluctuate up and down, just riding from the very top of the track to the bottom of the track in a heartbeat, and making sure you manage that is really crucial to success as well, because going over the top of it is not particularly helpful. You get some money, which is nice, but going off the bottom of it loses you victory points, and they're quite hard to come by. So you don't really want to be going off the bottom of the morale track. Additionally, there's a morale helps. Your higher morale helps and can help in combat. So that's another benefit of staying up high on it. But these actions that you've got on your board, they're things like, other than the expansion action, they're things like tax your people. You'll get a bunch of money, but drop down on that morale track. You can commit trade, where you'll get less money, but you won't lose morale. You can go to bread and circuses, which is sort of like a commitment to fun and games within your civilization, raises morale back up. You can go to diplomacy, which allows you to recruit more leaders. It also allows you to gain these treaty tokens, which can later be used to force players to trade territories to you and things like that. You can also force alliances on players and put traders in their cities to help bolster your trade action. And there is also the technology action, which is going to allow you to go to that technology rondel, and you can start to research all these different technologies, and they're going to allow you to put out more cities. And they're going to allow your ships to move faster, your military to be stronger and move faster. You can increase your trade revenue there as well. And you can also just get points. The culture technology is just points. So it's a more like investment in the arts, I suppose. And then the more you sort of get, the cheaper sort of linked technologies become. So there's this sort of sense of them being interwoven. So if you have good technology, good military technology, for example, then trade and city building becomes cheaper. But there's also a benefit for being the first one to do those things, to research the technologies. But by dint of being the first one, you get some points and then everyone else gets them cheaper. So it's modeling a lot of stuff. And functionally, the actions are actually very quick to take. So to start off the bat, I went into this with actually quite low expectations because the rulebook's quite a hard read. And also it's an indie game, self-published, right? So it's completely unedited, so to speak. But I'd noticed that it's got quite a high rating on BGG, and there seems to be a real cult following for it. So I was definitely keen to check it out and see what it was all about. And having played it now, I can see where the love for this comes from. Oh yeah, there's this mechanism as well where you've got like these vassals, and they become everything. So, you need these vassal tokens to control the territories. They become your armies, they become your ships. And then you can only unlock more of them by building cities. So you've got these cities locked up in your sort of development track, and you have to build the cities on the map in order to unlock more vassals. So there's this sort of sense of managing the expansion of your kingdom, which is really cool, actually. I thought that was a really cool mechanism. And the more cities you build, at the top of every round, you're going to lose a bunch of morale because you've got these cities out. Because it's just people are harder. Big numbers of people are just harder to manage. I thought that was really clever. I liked that mechanism. And I can sort of see where the cult following for this game has come from, because it models a lot of stuff. And it does so in a way that's reasonably fast to resolve. Like the combat is also quite quick it's dice combat. But the way it works is that there are 2 dice and they've got a series of different faces, slightly different probabilities on each. So you could say one is slightly skewed towards certain characteristics and one the other. Because the way the combat works really is that you've got a bunch of tokens and they get assigned to attackers and defenders based on how high you are up that military track, who has the most morale, who's got more numbers. And so you give these tokens out and then you roll the dice. And then if the dice faces show the tokens that you have, you kill your opponents. So that's kind of a really nice idea. So you're looking to try to sort of shore up all of the advantages on your side, which again is a cool way of modeling that sort of, top level, high level combat, But most of the actions, with the exception of the expansion action, are really quick to resolve on your turn. Do a technology, up your morale, do a trade. Like, the turns happen really quickly, and it's quite a snappy game despite all the complexity. So I think that's kind of where this sort of cult following has developed, because it models a lot. Everything is sort of interworking. There's a lot of sort of different moving parts and a lot of sort of these little elements to engage with, but functionally the downtime is relatively low, and because you can only do one expansion action per turn, it's like everyone gets one big action per turn, and then the rest of their actions are fairly quick to resolve. That's great. I don't know if a lot of people actually get to see this side of the game, because the rulebook's really tough. It's clearly written by a designer who is almost like keeping a very explicit set of notes. It is not an accessible document, but it is very precise. You won't have rules questions that are not answered by the rules document, with one exception. But it is not easy reading, and so it might be quite difficult to access the actual game. And this is not helped by the iconography. Once you understand the iconography in the game, it's okay, but there's a lot of it, and it's not the most intuitive. It's a barrier. It's not actually helpful, really. It's not unhelpful, actually, but it's also not helpful. It's kind of what's the term I'm looking for here, Barry? When it's not a net loss.
Neutral.
It breaks even. It breaks even.
Yeah.
But it wants a really nice lick of sort of paint, like a really nice graphic designer to sort of help out with these things. It wants a rulebook editor to make this more accessible. And to that point, it wants, I think, a little bit of editing as well. Just like sort of, a little bit of mechanical streamlining. Because I think there's a really promising title here, and I can see why it's really engaged with a lot of people, because it models that sort of 4X civilization building in a way that sort of gives you lots of options, lots of toys to play with, but does so in a way that's sort of snappy. And it could feel, I think, like there's a lot of dead actions, because you're taking, bread and circuses, go up morale track. Now I'm going to take taxes. I get money and go back down morale track. Now I have to do something else to go back on morale track. But the systems work together in a satisfying enough way that you don't really notice the dead actions, I don't think. Or they don't feel like that. It's sort of like, all right, how am I going to manage this? Can I get that from somewhere else? So I think, if you're sort of into these sort of it's very sandboxy as well. Trying to discern how to actually win is quite challenging. I think for it's the opposite of the, Altay starting technology. This gives you no indication of what you need to do to win, other than these two. That's kind of a lie, right? It gives you the starting tile, or your victory point tile at the start that says you're going to earn points at the end of the game for this, and then it gives you 2 more face up on the board. However, if you want to go up that era track that I spoke about, if you want to progress through the different stages of civilization, then every time you have to have a revolution. So you have to meet a certain number of criteria, like have built this many cities, have researched this many technologies, and then you qualify to advance. And then you have to have a revolution in order to actually advance. And when you do that, you will A, get points for doing it first, and B, you can pick one of those two face-up objective tiles on the board, you score it for yourself, and then it goes away, and a new one is dealt out. Which I wasn't sure how I felt about, because it does feel a little bit like a positive feedback loop where often the first person to progress is going to get those every time. But it didn't play out that way. There were definitely two of us who were sort of in contention to be the first one into each age. Because the revolution action kills your whole turn. The minute you do a revolution, you are done. You're not even going to get auto expand if you didn't expand. So that's the timing around that is quite tasty, right? Because it's like, oh, do I have a revolution now? Because I'm going to get all the points for the objective and the points for being first. But then I'm going to have to sack off my whole round and potentially lose a bunch of actions. Furthermore, you become very vulnerable to attack. When you're in a revolution, you have a number of penalties in combat. We did not get to do any player versus player in our game. In fact, our civilizations barely touched each other. Now, I don't know if that's because we were new players, we were inexperienced players. I was largely the only one that actually engaged in combat by dint of the fact that there are not that many barbarians on the board, and the ones that there was a handful near me, and then the others would need to be sought out. Now, combat advances your victory parade, which gives you bonuses. And so there is incentive to do it, and I do think there's value in doing it. I also think it's a fun mini game. To be fair, it is like a bit like gambling, and I do enjoy that. So there's a luck-based element there that I enjoyed engaging with. I don't know if the player versus player combat would feel a little bit bad, or, again, it's going to have that Altay problem, right? If you're going to be sort of locked into a certain position where it might be difficult for you to pick on the right people, the winners, the ones that are in the lead. On the flip side, you can make alliances with people, and they will be penalized if they break the alliance. So, I mean, you can also be punished if you have a lot of traitors in someone's civilization and they betray you. All your traitors get kicked out, unless you agree not to do that. So there's quite a lot of flexibility around how you sort of manage your relationships with other players and things like that, even though it's very sort of binary, right? Like there's the general table talk, and that's going to be based on your group. You can make non-binding agreements, of course you can, because it's a game with targeted player interaction, but there's no formal rules for that. There are a lot of formal rules for exchanging traders and forming alliances and stuff like that, which you can still engage with, and you can make that part of your non-binding discussions. But if that sort of stuff, but I think, if somebody's running away with the game, you might need to engage with that more. However, I did feel like in the normal length game, we didn't get to engage in some of the deeper mechanisms. Probably, again, because we're all new to the game, we didn't know the full sort of depth of it. We didn't understand that. We were mostly just focusing on sort of pushing the different buttons to see what would happen. And also because, I think in that normal length game, it's actually a bit too short to get really into the weeds of that stuff. Maybe the game wants you to be more focused. We definitely wound up doing a bit of everything on the technology track. I do think you need to diversify, though. Anyway, it was interesting. I think the biggest issue I'm going to have now is those two players I played with are my friends from out of town. And now I think the next time I play, I'm going to have to teach it again. And it's also long. It's like it's a whole afternoon, it's a good 4-hour, 5-hour game, I think. If people were really across the rules and had internalized it, it would be faster. If there were better iconography and better player aids, it would be faster. I think you could get this to be quite quick, quite a lot quicker than it is. But it's so sort of indie that, it's not like Root where I bring it out and everyone's like, oh, we know how to play Root now, because it's in the collective consciousness. Era of Tribes, really intriguing big game. And coming back to crowdfunding. So if Euro-esque Well, actually, if hybrid 4X civilization building is something you're interested in, definitely look at this. But you need to be prepared to tackle the rulebook. So there's not a bad rules video from Easy Board Games, but it is like almost an hour long. So, that's a sort of before you go to game night type thing. But it definitely will help you get started. The other thing is that when it comes to crowdfunding, there will be an expansion called Beliefs and Betrayals, which Arden kindly sent me. I hope I have a chance to play it and talk about it while the campaign is live. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if I do get a chance, I will come back and talk about this some more. I did read the rules for that. It's adding 2 new major elements to the game. One is a religious track, which lets you sort of develop bonuses and also different types of workers and things like that. And you can engage in that when you've done the first culture research. So it takes that culture technology that's kind of just points and makes it linked into the religion thing. But what I did enjoy particularly about the religion track, which does give you these extra options, is that the more religious your civilization becomes, the more expensive technologies get for you. So you have to sort of like sacrifice advancing up all the technology tracks. Because you're engaging more in religion.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not there's a correlation between religiousness and Luddites, I don't know. But certainly that's part of the modeling in this game. And you can build like sort of special buildings and things like that. And being religious helps a lot with the morale track as well, which is quite good. And then the other area that it adds is called, it's called Beliefs and Betrayals. The betrayal side of that is the spy network, where you've got these spies and these spy tracks where you can sort of invest in your espionage network, which is, and when I say that, it's really just a sort of a binary numerical value. But if other people come to spy on you, they're going to check your sort of spy defenses, and then you can negatively influence each other by doing these spy combat sort of sections. And what I liked about that is it adds an additional layer of player interaction. So that appeals to me in theory. Of course, we actually set up Beliefs and Betrayals with our first game and immediately realized that was going to be way too much. We had to ignore it. So unfortunately, we didn't get to play it, but hopefully I'll have a chance to look at that in a bit more detail. But if you were looking for a way to sort of interact with or create player interaction on the table, especially when there's maybe less scope for the sort of military interactions that come with moving your vassals around, then I think Betrayals is sort of seeking to add that functionality, which is pretty neat.
And that'll be on GameFound.
That's coming
soon?
to GameFound early November. Yeah, probably not long after this episode comes out.
Nice.
But definitely do your research, because this is not an everyone game. This is probably going to hit really well with the right groups, but those groups need to be people who are into big expansion, 4X, like the theme of building up a civilization, and they're interested in interlocking mechanisms, and they're willing to play something that's going to go on for 4 or 5 hours and has the potential for player conflict that could lead to sort of major setback.
Cool. Well, speaking of games that might be more for everyone, I'll go over. I managed to play Stamp Swap, which is the new Stonemaier game.
Pivoting to the complete opposite of what I was talking about.
Yeah, the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. Designed by Paul Salomon. Yeah. And then maybe we can talk about the games we've played together, not the same games that we've played at least. Mm-hmm. So Stamp Swap should be out when this podcast drops, or it comes out the day after this podcast drops, to general retail. That is a 1 to 5 player game combining the I cut you choose mechanism along with open drafting. As players, you're working to collect stamps to fill up your collection book, working towards open goals, which everybody knows are out there, but you can fulfill in variable order. So it's up to you on any given turn which objective you complete, but you must complete an objective every round. The game's played over 3 rounds, and on each of the 3 rounds you flip cards which determine how many stamps are available in the market for that round. So it tells you what size of stamp and the number of stamps that come out. That's then laid out in front of all the players, And on your turn, you're going to draft one of those stamps to add to your pile. The number of stamps you can collect varies on round to round, but generally 6. And it will go round and round and round, everybody taking a stamp until everybody's got the required number of stamps in front of them. Then the next phase starts up, where you're going to take your piles and split them, or you're going to take the stamps you collected and split them into 2 piles, which you're then going to offer up to other people to take. And then it will go round again in player order, where a player will take a pile of stamps from in front of another player, at which point the player who's had their stamps taken keeps the other half of their stamps. So off the 2 piles you make, you're definitely getting one of them. And that will go round until players have chosen from all. It could be that by the time it gets to your turn, other players have chosen from amongst themselves in a 4-player game, like the 3 other players might have taken it, and so you get both your piles. But then once you have the stamps that you're keeping for that round, you have to place them into your book, and then you're going to complete a goal for that round by putting your token down on the objective. You've got a choice of, I think, 5, and you're going to complete 3 of those objectives as we go. I think it's 4, and then there's 2 endgame objectives. And once you've put a stamp in your book, you can't move it again. So in a subsequent round, if you wanted to try making different patterns touch or different types of stamps touch, there's 5 different, might be more actually. I think there's like 6 different types of stamps, whether that's technology, nature, what are the other themes? There's a couple of other themes in there, transport, buildings,
animals?
And these are the different. Pardon?
Animals?
I think nature covers animals and trees. Or I think actually there's flowers and there's other nature. But once it's down, it's down. But you can put it anywhere within your stamp book. And there's also ones that are effectively no theme, but much higher points. In addition, your stamps also have postmarks on them. Some postmarks are negate any value, other ones are worth just straight points. So all the things that you're drafting, you've got to have an idea of what you want. You've got to have an idea of what other people want, so you can make your piles favour you while people are taking the one that you don't want. And then you've got to be working towards building up your stamp collection and working towards the objectives, whilst also working towards the end game scoring, which is things like have the most small stamps or have the most large stamps, things along those lines, or the most of the most flower stamps, whatever that objective might be for the end game. And that's done 3 times, and at the end of those 3 times, you add up the scores, you do the end game scoring, whoever has the most points wins, is the best stamp collector. So the I cut you choose mechanisms, I'd say, is fairly underutilised in board gaming, but it's also a hard one to make work. I don't know if we ever played Mammoth.
We did. We played it once a long time ago.
Yeah, I think that's like the most, what's the word I'm after here, the most pure, or one of the most pure versions of that mechanism. You dump out a whole bunch of tiles, you take what you want, leaving other people to take from the rest, but if you take more than your fair share, people can take it from in front of you, whilst returning one of the tiles to the middle until everybody's got what they're happy with in front of them. And then the different tiles you've got move you on different tracks and score different points, which is fun. And I certainly enjoy that a lot more than Castles of Mad King Ludwig or Isle of Skye, where the cutting and choosing part of it's actually you're assigning a cost to certain tiles, and so you're choosing this tile is going to be worth 6 points or 6 money this turn, and whether players pay that direct or to the bank, it's slightly different. And then I have played, I don't know if you've managed to play The Great Split.
No, I've not.
So it's a game, it's basically similar to Mammoth, apart from it's even more abstract in terms of everything's just a track. And so you're taking cards, you're splitting them into 2 halves, you're passing them to your opponent, they're taking some, giving you some, and then basically whatever cards you've got left is what tracks you're going up, and it's a very pure version of that I cut you choose mechanism, but it's not a huge amount of fun, to be perfectly honest. So my thoughts on Stamp Swap are, I've come around to it a little bit, but the fact you draft your stamps first and then you split them, it's almost like it's an unnecessary step. Like if you were, it's maybe not though. Like I say, you're trying to get stamps that other people are going to favour so you can keep the stamps that you really want. So I guess that's an interesting part of the drafting, but it just adds, the way the game plays out in terms of how it feels is that here's some mechanisms that we like, we've put them in the same game, they don't really belong together. Like, I don't know why you're going around collecting stamps just to give some of them away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a mash of elements, and it's not, it doesn't feel thematic to what you're trying to do. Certainly if you had like a market and you're trying to buy them from other players, or you had the opportunity to perhaps, give a player some points for a certain stamp that they've got or something like that.
I was going to say, there's something sort of inherently wrong about I split you choose and stamp swap. Because stamp swap implies trading, but there's no trading. Yeah. There's just, I've got 2 sets and you take one.
Yeah. And obviously you're trying to make your best. Again, you've split and they get to choose. So you're trying to make it balanced, but you're trying to make it so you keep the ones you want.
But that's not a swap.
It's definitely not a swap. And the game's over, it's lightning fast. It's 3 rounds. The marketplace does vary. There's a few abilities on the marketplace. You can also earn, in addition to stamps, there are specialists which give you an action, but the actions are really not exciting or fun. At least the ones that came out. I had a couple that meant I could take an extra stamp from what was left, or I could get a big stamp out of the box, or something like that to add to my piles before the end of the round. But it just wasn't a lot of fun. It was quite obvious, I think, what everybody was kind of working towards in terms of where the most points were on the objectives. I happened to do that a lot better than my opponents. I finished. The game goes up to 300 points. There's tokens for 300 points. So you go around 50, mark a 50, go around to 100, mark 100, go around to 150, mark 150, and you can get up to 200 points. I finished on 187, give or take, the first game. And I felt like, I could easily have smashed that 200 point barrier. Nobody else got even up to 100. I dominated the large stamp market, which then gave me an insurmountable amount of points at the end of round 2 of the 3. It was very obvious from there that nobody was going to get anywhere close to me. And
that's just not very exciting, is it, Barry?
It's not very exciting. And I find this is the same thing with a lot of Stonemaier games and what he chooses to publish. Not just the ones he designs, but also the ones he puts out. I will say I didn't like Wingspan at first, which is probably the most famous game. And I still don't love it, but I did find a lot of enjoyment from the art and some of the expansions. That Nectar maybe opens the game up a bit too much, but the Asia 2-player board element adds a little something I like, and I enjoy all the stuff around the game as well. And I think the game's decent enough. Mm-hmm. But off all the games he's put out, like Rolling Realms is probably my favourite one that he's done. It's just a little roll and write, although it's got 64 expansions or something at this point.
I've not played it.
You not played it at all?
No, Rolling Realms. I've not played Rolling Realms at all.
Yeah, like it's super cheap to get into, but then every pack's like, £5-8 for a pack of cards, and there's 64 of them or something at this point. And I will play Viticulture, and I will play Euphoria, but every other game doesn't do anything for me, and that includes Wormspan. I hate Wormspan.
I didn't play
it. Which, might be... I know I said I didn't particularly like Wingspan, but I actively dislike Wormspan, even though it's practically the same game. Because I can't find that enjoyment in it for the art or the stuff around it, and the things it does do different. I don't like.
Wingspan sits solidly now in the spot in my collection where I never suggest it and I never get it out unless people specifically really want to play it, or my partner wants to have a go because she really likes it, and I'm happy to play it with her just because I'm happy to be playing games with her. But it's not Wingspan's not one I ever reach for.
I would. It's in my collection, and there's nothing in my collection that I wouldn't at some point want to play. But yeah, it's not the first choice for what it does. And again, I don't want to just bash Stoneware Games for what they do. I think they appeal to quite a wide range of people. But I still have old Libertalia. I seen the gameplay changes that new Libertalia made, and I was like, okay, I'm into that. I quite like some of the things you've done there. And then I played it, and I didn't think I was the kind of person where art could put me off a game. I didn't want to play it again after looking at it. And so there's just this disconnect between me and what Stoneware put into their games, whether that's artistically or mechanically. Like I hate Scythe. I don't know what it is, but this is another swing and a miss. Like I don't know why this game exists. It doesn't do anything better than anybody else, and I don't know. Anyway, well, I'm poo-pooing things. If you go all the way back to the first podcast, I did say that I would probably be quite negative on a lot of games. And this is another case where it's just I don't want to play it again.
Well, fair enough. I will very quickly, before we move on, because we should wrap this episode up. It's gone very long, but that's probably because it's Essen and there's been a lot of play and we missed a week. Sort of. We made a hype episode. But I do want to just quickly mention Concilium Urbis because I picked it up at Essen and we played it while we were there. I played it with 4 players, which also included Michael and Chris from the show who came to Essen with me. And this is published by Perro Loco Games, a Spanish publisher, designed by Jorge Barrosa and Jesus Fuentes. It goes 1 to 6 players, so there's a solo mode. It's a competitive tile-laying game with auctioning and I split you choose, which is why I'm mentioning it, because it's the same sort of mechanism. So this is sort of some kind of futuristic city building thing where there's some kind of mine and it's full of the magical crystal that everyone wants. And so what you're building is tiles in a grid. They're square. And the tiles work together, and at the end of the game, you're going to be given points based on how you laid them out and what you did. So, very typical example of the tile laying genre, right? There are a bunch of cards on the table that are face up and are going to tell you how the different tiles are going to score. And nicely, the game does come with variants for those. 3 sets of cards, actually, changing up the scoring for each tile-ish. Different sort of more complex variants of the same kind of mechanism. But you can play with the baby set, the second level, the third level set. We played with the first set. And because I'll get to the interesting mechanisms in just a minute. But the tiles, they're houses that want to be next to trees. They're factories that can process the crystals that come from the mines. But then if you don't have enough trees to offset the pollution, you're going to be punished. There's towers, and the towers can be built up, and they're going to give you influence. More on that in a minute. So there's all these sort of kind of standard tile laying things. Everything wants to be next to something else. And occasionally you want to group things that also other things want to be next to. And now you have to decide whether to break up the groups and things like that. There's sort of a maximum cap size for the groups. So, you need to sort of optimize all of those different, geometry things. Now, if you don't like that stuff, this is not going to change your mind about that stuff. But if you like that stuff, like you liked Harmonies or you liked Cascadia, then this is, more of that stuff, but with 2 really interesting twists. The first twist is that it's I split you choose. And so at the beginning, instead of drafting, like you do in the vast majority of these games, where you draft some tiles, put them in your tableau and move on, we are just going to each pull 4 tiles out the bag at the start of the round. And then we take the 4 tiles and make 2 sets of 2. And pass them around to the player on our right or left. That will alternate across the game. And then we'll receive 2 sets from the player on our other side. We'll pick a set to keep, pass one back to them, and then we'll be given 1 set back from the other player. Now we've got 4 tiles again, but, from a set we chose and from a set we were giving away. So that's really nice. It's not as agonizing an I split you choose choice as maybe some other games that use this mechanism. And occasionally you will draw 3 of the same kind of tile, so there's no choice in the I split because you can functionally only make 2 combinations. But there was enough there that it was interesting, and there was enough there that when you did have a difficult choice, you really had to pay attention to what the person you were passing it to is doing. And what sort of further spices up the I split you choose element of this game is that once you've collected your 4 tiles, you're going to put them in your tableau. Then there's going to be a little production phase where the factories are going to turn the mines into crystals. And eventually when you amass enough crystals, you can use them to access a different scoring objective. Distinct from the cards I mentioned earlier, these are sort of scoring objectives that you can turn on by amassing crystals. That's an optional strategy, but you probably ought to try and do a bit of it because you are going to end up with mines and factories anyway. But build too many factories, you're going to get too much pollution, and then you need to get trees to offset that. Anyway, after everyone's done that little production phase, you will also have produced influence. And then we're going to go to the bidding phase, where a card is going to be revealed from a deck, and that card is going to, in the base baby version of the game, just adjust the scoring for one of those initial scoring conditions up or down. So like the house's scoring condition is now worth more or less. The pollution is going to have a more severe penalty, or it might be less of an impact. And everyone's going to do a blind bid with their influence on whether to implement the card or sack it off. And so we're all going to do a little auction, and then whatever you bid, no matter whether you won or lost, you lose those votes. So maybe you want to keep them for the future because they persist round to round. And 7 rounds of this, and then we go to final scoring, score up your tableau, and that's the game. And it was great. I really, really liked it. It took that tile laying thing and just made it really interactive. I cared about what the people on either side of me were doing because I was giving them tiles every round, and I cared about what everyone was doing because I needed to look at the voting and pay attention to that. And, it just made it sort of much more interactive. And, generally speaking, when we're doing tile laying, I prefer something like Carcassonne, where we're all building the same board because it's more interactive, it's more cutthroat. I care about what other people are doing. This has individual boards, but makes it interactive in a way that these other games of the genre haven't done. So I was really impressed with that. The one little caveat I would mention is that there were 2 production issues with the version I picked up at Essen. Hopefully they'll be fixed for the retail release. One of the sets of cards is in Spanish. Their English translation was not in my box. And also everyone starts with a single tile. And in the rulebook, those tiles clearly have a distinct back, so you can't mix them in with all the other tiles and lose them. But in the final printing, they have the same back as all the other tiles.
Right.
And actually, there is a kind of a painful element to setup where you have to, all the tiles are numbered for player count, and then they go into a bag. So like if you're adjusting the player count by 1, you have to fish out all the tiles of a certain number, which is kind of a laborious setup step, given how quick and light the game is otherwise. But, I can see why they've had to do it that way. I don't begrudge them that because I really enjoyed the game. But I think they were desperately trying to get these available for Essen, clearly, because they forgot to translate some of those cards. Well, the good news is the cards don't get shuffled. They don't get drafted or anything. So you can just print off a translation and, it's fine. They just sit face up on the table for the whole thing. Right. Let's talk about some games we've both been playing. Let's start with an easy one. Lord of the Rings Duel. I like Seven Wonders Duel. Should I get this?
Yes, right, next one.
Good. Glad we sorted that
out. So I guess for people who don't know, this is a re-implementation of top 20 favourite Seven Wonders Duel with a Lord of the Rings theme. So still published by Repos Productions and still designed by Antoine Bauza and Bruno Cathala. This is a 2-player only game, which has players alternate drafting cards from a tableau as they work towards any of the 3 victory conditions, which in this case is moving along a track. So if you're the Fellowship, you reach Mount Doom, chuck the ring in. If you're the Nazgul, you catch up with the Fellowship and capture them. You can vie for control of Middle-earth by placing troops and fortifications out on a small map. And if you're in all the areas, you win. Or you can rally the people of Middle-earth to your cause, which you can also do as the bad guys, by collecting green cards, so the science cards in Seven Wonders Duel.
Yeah, the science cards have been repurposed as alliances.
Yeah. And if you achieve any of those conditions, you immediately win. And if it goes to a tiebreaker, then it's the most control of Middle-earth, where you've got the most presence. So it is functionally the same as Seven Wonders Duel.
Yeah.
A couple of bits different.
Yeah, I played this once at Essen with someone who hadn't played Seven Wonders Duel. I really enjoyed it. I would say the most obvious apparent change, at least to me, is, well, actually, the board, the area control board is obviously new. That's the sort of the most obvious and apparent change. But the little tweak to the military track is actually what got me, which is in Seven Wonders Duel, it's a tug of war, so you're just going back and forth. So you're trying not to let it slide too much towards your opponent's side. In Lord of the Rings Duel, it's 2 separate tracks, and it's just presented in a very appealing way. But functionally, it's 2 separate race tracks, and whoever gets to the end of that track, their track first, will win. And the only way you can stop someone else advancing on it is by taking the cards that advance you up it. But the component, if you haven't seen it, is really, really nice. It looks like the Nazgul are chasing the hobbits, and it's a nice presentation.
Yep. It's interesting, though, the blue cards, which were civilization cards and victory points in Seven Wonders Duel, have become effectively the red cards and military cards in Lord of the Rings Duel, for this tug-of-war element. I'd be interested in seeing some of the math behind the average number of military icons in Seven Wonders Duel that was required to get to the end, versus how many spaces travelling as the Nazgul or as the Fellowship to get to Mount Doom have, because there's more, Seven Wonders Duel, there's like 7 spaces, 9 spaces of military to get them, whereas there's like 15 spaces on this track to go along. So that would be interesting, but also probably balanced with the number of ring symbols for movement on the cards in the game.
I was just going to say, it's definitely been sort of re-themed, because if you've played Seven Wonders Duel and you're trying to track what we're talking about, there is a military element to this game, but it's this completely new thing of control the map. The military track has been repurposed as the sort of the journey of the ring bearers, and there's a blue card with a ring symbol that advances you up it in the same way the swords advanced you back and forth on the tug of war in the previous game.
I mean, some of this comparison is only useful to people that have played the original Seven Wonders Duel. But the board control and the map area is interesting. You're putting out potentially towers, you're putting out guys on the map, and the combat's very straightforward, 1 for 1. If you're able to place one of your dudes where one of their dudes are, they both die. If there's an empty space, you can put your dude in there. Super straightforward. And then the landmarks, they're called landmarks in this one. So you don't draft wonders at the start of the game anymore. So you don't have unique wonders, but there are public landmarks which serve the same kind of function, similar to Pantheon expansion, where they're out there for anybody to grab. So on your turn, one of your actions can be to take these landmarks, which helps change the order in which you're drafting cards from the tableau. But obviously they come at a cost. But most of those landmarks let you place a tower down on the area control element of the map, and towers and units can coexist. So that's one way of having both players in a single area. But units and units can't coexist.
Mm-hmm.
Always has to be somebody winning. And then once you get into the third age, so the game's played over 3 ages, each of which new cards are placed out in a certain shape in the tableau for players to take from. In the third age, there's a lot more movement, so you can take your military pieces on the board and use them to move around, trying to control all 7 of those locations on the board. Or as you collect the alliances, so as you're drumming up support from the people of Middle-earth, there are bonus tokens you can take, which typically modify an action. So either every time you play a red card, you can move on the ring track, or maybe every time you move on the ring track, you can place a guy on the map. Help build up a little bit of differences between the players as you're drafting your resources and then buying your more powerful cards as you go along. So I would say it's a solid re-implementation.
Mm-hmm.
It takes some of the expansion elements, like I say with Pantheon, incorporates that directly into the base game. It changes up that military tug of war, like you say, into the race, the track. You definitely can't ignore any one area of the game without just losing that way, right? You can't ignore the rings or not move on the track.
Just like the base game or the original game, with the exception of the war track, which is sort of neutralizable because nobody's going to rush to victory from the middle. And I think that's why they've changed that to be 2 distinct tracks. Because realistically, nobody's going to win in the first 2 ages unless someone's being really careless. So it really is a game of spending the first 2 ages trying to sort of mitigate the most threat your opponent can make while shore up your threat in other areas. And so inevitably this game, and this is one of the reasons why it's so sort of tense and satisfying, is when it gets to the third age, there is contention on all 3 fronts. And then, but typically you'll be sort of very tight on one front and maybe just trying not to lose on another front. And so you get that, you build that up, that situation up, and then the third age is where it could all go wrong because the game has reached its climax.
Yeah. And certainly that third age has always been very tense. Like there's a couple of times I thought, wow, there's no way I can stop you getting that last alliance icon. And then I was like, well, actually, you don't have the resources for that and you're 1 coin short. So if I expose it now, then you won't be able to take it and do that. And I was like, well, hold on, then those alliance tokens are probably in the discard. So now I need to focus on getting the landmarks that allow me to go digging in the discard pile to do those kind of things. And there's a lot to focus on. Really, it feels like just swatting away the opponent from winning. Yeah. You're just when you're scrambling to stay alive, you're like, any wrong move here and I lose the game. Yeah. And if you've not seen the layout of the tableau, several of the cards are placed face down. You're not sure what they are until somebody takes all the cards covering them, at which point they're revealed. Mm-hmm. And you're not wanting to reveal 2 face down cards where your opponent only needs a single movement point to win, or needs a single alliance token to win, or needs a single military location to win. And so the timing of everything's super interesting, and it's always pretty tense at the end.
Yep. I think there's a reason why the original has cemented itself as a solid popular title, and I think this has, potentially the quality to give it a run for its money for that spot, because the theme is just, great, and it makes a number of improvements and takes some of the best parts of the expansions.
I've only been tracking gameplay since like 2020 when lockdown kind of started. I've played about 280 games of Seven Wonders Duel. It's expansions, so Agora and Pantheon, but mostly base. And I played 100 games of Seven Wonders at probably 4-player competitive, and about 10 games with Armada and cities and leaders and stuff. So I played a lot of Seven Wonders, and I think I would probably physically pull this out more often than Seven Wonders Duel. And obviously Seven Wonders Duel is on Board Game Arena if you wanted to give it a try. but I will need a few more games before deciding that it's as tight and balanced for what it does.
That's interesting. I've not played as much as you, so I couldn't necessarily make that kind of judgment. But I do notice that the Agora bits are missing from this. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's another card type to be looking at in another area. I mean, you're not really doing the area control element from Agora the same way as you are on the board. It's inspired. There's some sort of cross inspiration between them, but they're not really the same. I certainly think there's scope for expansions specific to this as well, and it'd be interesting if they're equally thematic.
But it's fair to say then that it's taken elements from both expansions and sort of simplified them into the core game.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. It's a more complete. Well, I haven't said that. Like, most of my games have been base Seven Wonders Duel. I think it's a lot of games in Seven Wonders Duel at the end are just racing for points. You know that you can probably fend off your opponent from getting that military victory or the science victory, and so you're working towards getting those points. This game feels on all three fronts like I could lose at any flip of the card could be enough to ruin it for me. Not because of that card specifically, but because of the opportunities that sets up for the opponent later on in the round, and you can see those cards coming. So
yeah, I mean, it doesn't have points in this one at all, which I really appreciate.
No.
Yeah.
But I will say the tiebreaker being most control of the board does give an extra focus on that as an area.
Yeah, I wonder how often that tiebreaker will come up. Certainly not in my one play.
No. Has for me.
Oh, interesting. Well, we'll have to reconvene maybe when we've had a bit more time to play it, but I, for one, loved it, and I'd be very happy to play more of it.
Yep, same.
Brilliant. So that's Lord of the Rings, Duel for Middle-earth. Oh, so then the final sort of big game that we're going to talk about in this episode is Endeavor Deep Sea. This is published by the Grand Gamers Guild and designed by Carl DeViser and Jared Gray, who designed Endeavor Age of Sail. This is the re-implementation of the system. It was kickstarted about a year ago, I think, and it's been delivered to backers now. There were also a handful of the deluxe copies available at Essen. And I will tell you for free, Barry, that there were no copies of the retail Endeavor Deep Sea available at Essen to buy. However, there was a very small number of retail editions available for review. And so I managed to get one of those copies. I got the exclusive retail edition to review.
Fair enough.
Not many people have the retail edition yet, Barry. They've all got that fancy deluxe edition, but I've got the retail.
Sure do. I bet you had that little cardboard wave as your first player token, didn't you?
I don't think we actually used it.
Fair enough. It's a nice wooden piece in the deluxe version.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, so we actually punched this out at Essen, and we played it there because we had a table of 4 people sitting around, and one of them knew how to play it. So I said, let's get it to the table and get it played.
Yeah.
So this is a review copy that I did receive from the publisher.
Fair enough. I'm playing the deluxe version, which I bought.
Yeah, Barry bought it.
So Endeavor Deep Sea is a 1 to 4 player scenario-driven action point tech tree game, which, as mentioned, is a re-implementation of Endeavor Age of Sail, but I'd say it's more of a reimagining, similar mechanisms to do slightly different things. The game's played over 6 rounds, and each round players draft an expert. So in Age of Sail, you draft a building, which gives you an action. But in this one, you're drafting an expert, functionally the same. And that expert comes with different skills, which allow you to move along certain tracks, which let you take more advanced experts in future rounds, let you dive deeper into the ocean to look for things, let you research wildlife for conservation, or just take more actions for your action token, whether it's a double action or 2 separate actions, depending on what's going on. The game's tracked by those experts, so once everybody has 6, that is the final round, and that is the same as the buildings in Endeavour Age of Sail. But the difference is that the board's not all in front of you to begin with. So the board will open up, there's different tiles, and you have to discover those tiles and move to those tiles to do the actions that are on them. So you can use your sonar to discover these new areas. You'll get a bonus for discovery. When you travel to a new area, you'll get a bonus, generally just moving along a track or gain a resource as you're going. And then as you move up on the tracks, you get access to bigger and better things, whether that's more action tokens back at the start of the round, generate more action tokens, whether that is take higher level experts or access to additional submarines, or to go deeper with your submarines, or for your submarines to move more. That's all in the technology track. And then finally there's the DNA track, which you're going to be moving up in order to do the sort of conservation action. And it does use all the same elements to some degree as Endeavour Age of Sail, but this game is a lot more accessible, I think. It's a lot more thematic in many ways. And I would also say it's a lot more fun. Just in terms of your freedoms and what you're doing, and how to play the game. So I don't know if you've got anything else to say on how the game's played necessarily.
No.
So people understand what we're going to talk about, but to my mind, everybody I played it with would want to play this over the original Endeavour. And I really liked the original Endeavour, right? Mm-hmm. Another game I rated an 8. I discovered Endeavour during lockdown, played it on Tabletop Simulator, bought it, got the expansion, and had a lot of fun with it. The Deep Sea's slightly less tight, I would argue, and it's less combative in many ways. There's a lot more sharing spaces to do stuff, and you're not directly fighting people in this one. There's also no slavery to contend with in Endeavour Deep Sea, so always a bonus, depending on what kind of person you are.
A real 180 on the theme here. We've gone from, Age of Discovery imperialism with all the problems that come with that, the problematic elements that come with that, to deep sea conservationism and combating climate breakdown, I suppose. So good stuff.
But it is, at its core, it was very quick to learn because I knew how to play the other Endeavour. Yeah. So understanding that the actions that or the specialists that you draft gave you access to additional actions, whilst also moving you along the different tracks and what those opened up for you, was very straightforward and very easy to teach. People were able to branch out into different areas of the game very quickly. I went heavy on getting the advanced experts early on. Another player went heavy into the technology, so getting the additional submarine and being able to dive into deeper areas. Yeah. Whereas the other player did a little bit of everything. I think I only played 3-player. I don't think I played it 4-player. Mm-hmm. And everybody was doing something. There was a lot of, well, as I said, there's no direct combat. It is still quite interactive. You're moving onto tiles. There's a limit to what you can do because each tile only has a certain number of actions you can take on it. So if you're doing a conservation action, once you've done that, nobody else can take that action. Although hopefully there'll be a few you could do. When you're diving to find new resources, which is usually in the form of DNA, but other stuff in there. Once those piles of tokens are depleted, then there's no more. So one player opened up this new area that they went into first. The other 2 players came in behind them and got rid of all the tokens before he had another chance to get the dive action. But that was his own fault for putting that tile out, to be fair, without having the dive actions to follow it up with. Yep. And
yeah, so what it does really well in that sense is because you start the game with just the surface level of the board, and you're going to be adding tiles that represent the depths, right? So when I say the surface level, I mean the surface of the water, and each tile you add is a depth. And you can explore laterally as well, so you can sort of go along the surface, adding more surface tiles, or down, adding more depth tiles. But you can add tiles by doing these signal actions. You can, however, only dive into the tiles if you've researched the sort of depth diving technology. And there is also a maximum size to this tableau dictated by the scenario. But there is, what the game does really, really well is it sort of adds these restrictions and caveats and requirements to almost everything, like, for example, the gathering of the resources is the dive action. And there's a certain number of dive tokens on each tile, and so like once they're gone, and so there's always this pressure. There's always this sort of like little race to do the thing first, or if you do the thing, to be able to profit from it before everyone else. And everyone else is looking for that opportunity to nip it and take advantage of what you did. So it does that really, really well. I really enjoyed that part of it.
Mm-hmm. And the core, the original scenario, the first scenario, I should say, there's 10 different scenarios in the game, which can be played solo or as part of the competitive game. Mm-hmm. And there's a small track on there. You can get this different type of resource, which are stars, which then go onto the track. You either get a bonus for that, or that's going to add to your endgame scoring. And the core scenario, or the first scenario, basically is a competition for doing the most stuff. So one of the end game goals is who's done the most scanning of the depths, right? Another end game goal is who's conserved the most. Another end game goal is what was the last end game goal in the first one?
I don't know, because we weren't allowed to play that.
Well, did you not have any scenarios?
No, our group was, of course, a bunch of industry people at Essen, and they're like, you're not doing the first one. We're doing number 2.
But it's not that different. It's just what was it like? The fact you scored for everything you did, so that having tokens on the boards,
so I think,
was important in the first one.
I think that must be in. So there are. I don't know about the first scenario. I don't know about the other scenarios. In the second scenario, there are 3 end game objectives, which are linked to this scenario. And so those endgame objectives are going to be shaken up by the scenarios. I think they add additional sort of little mechanisms and tweaks and things to spice up the game otherwise, because it's got this sort of core framework, and then it spices it up with the scenarios. And in scenario number 2, you will be rewarded for the number of tokens you have in each column. So that's the surface tile and every tile below it. You'll total up all your tokens there. There's sort of like an area majority thing going on there. You're also going to get points for each token you have in like the surface area of specific columns. So it's more kind of like sort of taking actions on specific tiles in the second scenario.
And then, I've not looked into any of the later scenarios, but I believe the setup's slightly different for some of them. And also, as you mentioned, there's a size limit to the board based on what the scenario is, whether that's 5 across, 5 deep or not, debatable. And it's just it's a lot of fun. Everybody that played it, I thought, looked great. Everybody's like, oh, just so much fun. Just like I say, look at. Everybody had a good time with playing the game. We were working towards different things. The guy I thought was going to lose massively, because he got all these stars at the end. All these stars were worth 2 points, and he ended up getting like 26 points from the stars compared to everybody else's 9 or 10. And that was enough to pip us at the post. So he finished 98. I finished 89. Another player 76 or something. And it was just...
That sounds like you got a lot more points in the first scenario. Either that or we were all quite drunk because we didn't come close to that kind of score. But what I like about the structure is just how much of the sort of the administrative stuff is sort of simultaneous. And so it saves the round to round sort of timing element stuff to be just to the sort of the juiciest timing actions, like, drafting your guy and sorting out your income and your board and everything else. All of that can be done simultaneously or while you're waiting for other players to finish. And then you're just sort of waiting for those action selection moments where the timing is really important. And that, so it keeps the downtime to the interesting parts where you're actually caring about what other people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Although even your refresh phase can be exciting, you only get to remove a certain number of tokens from action spots you've used, and if you don't have enough refresh to get everybody, who do you leave? And then you're looking at opportunities to upgrade those specialists in the round to be able to free up that action. And typically you'll get additional resources when you flip a specialist, but you'll also get a better action. And it could be a distinctly different action depending on who the specialist is, compared to what you've done before. So do you want to remove the token to use them for their first action before looking for an opportunity to upgrade them to use them for their second action? There's just a lot of interesting enough decisions, but the game's open enough that I never really felt too boxed in until the very end, when you're really struggling to make the most of what you've got left, compared to where you can get to and what's still open on the board, looking for those last few points.
Yeah, and with those 10 scenarios, there's a lot of variability here. There's a lot of replayability. It is otherwise a relatively light game. It's relatively light. It's sort of a solid middleweight, I would say. It's not super heavy. But I do like the scenario concept to sort of zhuzh up the replayability and stuff like that, to keep that interesting and feeling a bit different. There's 10 scenarios to work through. I think by the time you got to the end, you're probably ready to go back to scenario 2. The impression I get is that scenario 1 is just for your first play.
Well, scenario 1 is just everything you're doing is working towards getting point.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of chase your high score kind of scenario, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a really good time with it, and I'd happily bring it out as most of the time. I'd be happy to teach it and happy to play it. Now, we did play at 4. I'm not sure if I'd be as keen on it at 2, but I'd certainly be happy to play it at 3.
I'd be interested to. I've not got it to the table solo yet. I'll give it a try solo.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the solo rules add, and there are a couple of modules that I don't think you get in the retail version that do different things.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pod of killer whales, for example, that you've got to avoid. Or I've not looked at the full rules.
Well,
but a very good 2 weeks of gaming.
Absolutely, and we actually played more. There's more stuff in the notes here, but we're out of time. So we're going to have to talk about these on a future episode. Barry played Dwellings of Eldervale. We'd like to hear his thoughts on that. I played SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the new CG game. Everyone wants to hear what I thought about that, but you'll have to come back for the next episode of the podcast.
Or maybe they can check out the YouTube shorts.
Yep. Check out our shorts on YouTube or on TikTok or on Instagram or on Facebook. If you don't follow us on the socials, check us out there. And make sure you do the things you need to do to make sure you keep getting this podcast. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more about games. Thanks for joining me, Barry.
Pleasure as always. Until next time.
Thanks to all the patrons who support the show. And until next time, bye-bye.